listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Fault lines.
And we are live from the divided states of America, fixated between the ever-expanding rift on our collective ideology. I'm your political analyst fighting for the right, Austin Pelly.
And in the left corner, I'm your indefatigable, your ever-vigilant, your burning ember in the darkness, your political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
That means that you are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Pelly. Happy Monday. How was your weekend, Jamarl?
Busy. Very busy. Yeah. Monday was the move, so it's like getting everything from Silver Spring to DC. And so, still setting the house up.
You got a U-Haul, right?
Yeah. Rented U-Haul, rented 2 movers.
Isn't it fun when they give it to you and it has like a tiny little bit of gas and you have to fill it back up?
Pretty much. I told them just keep it. Because there were no gas stations like within 10 minutes of their U-Haul. I was like, look, just keep it. I'm not driving this U-Haul truck around DC trying to find a gas station. Also, I didn't even want to take it to a gas station because of size and everything else.
Right.
But yeah, it's half full and they're like, just fill it back exactly to where to where it was.
When I did it, I did it moving my college stuff into like a storage unit and then bringing it back for the next year. I got a pickup truck and it was like just below a quarter of a tank.
Yeah.
And it was, you have to fill it up exactly to where that quarter of a tank was. If you went under, then you had to pay this fee of like the whole gas tank, essentially $40 or something like that. And if you went over, well, we'll just keep the extra.
We'll just keep it. We're not going to give you that back.
Yeah, that was like the, scammiest part of it. But
I think they do that because they don't want you to take the truck but so far. That's the only thing I can think of. Otherwise, I don't know why they just keep it that low.
Well, then because you're forced to fill it up, and more likely than not, you're going to overshoot it because you don't want to pay that extra fee.
Oh, you think they're doing that on purpose in order to get the person to pay more?
Absolutely. We have real news, though. I'll get into that now. In COVID news, yesterday in the United States, there were 295,922 new COVID cases reported, along with 2,565 deaths. Over the past week, there have been an average of about 298,641 cases per day, a decrease of 57% from the average 2 weeks ago. 64% of the total American public has been fully vaccinated, and 75% of residents have received at least 1 dose. As of this morning, the coronavirus has infected 76,419,014 people across the U.S. of A. and killed 901,405 people. I know, I guess I owe you a dinner or something because I took the under. You took the over, that we'd hit the 900,000.
Yeah.
Although when I made that bet, I didn't realize that, yes, we're going off the Times numbers. But we finished the show, and I was looking at all these headlines. U.S. surpasses 900,000 deaths. I'm like, oh, it was definitely going to be like that on Monday. Cool. Just a very source by source, just a little bit. So there's that. In national news, the White House this morning released a highly anticipated report from its labor task force that includes nearly 70 recommendations on how the government can help workers join labor unions and bargain collectively. These include the government offering greater access to the federal workforce for unions seeking to build memberships, and pushing agencies such as the National Labor Relations Board and Federal Labor Relations Authority to work closely together to facilitate worker organization. The 43-page report also pushes the Labor Department to ensure workers who allege retaliation when engaged in organizing receive full protection and prevent the misclassification of workers as independent contractors, a long-running battle with so-called gig economy workers. Attorney-turned-criminal Michael Avenatti was convicted Friday of swiping nearly $300,000 in book advance money from his then-client Stormy Daniels. The now twice convicted felon and one-time rising star now faces a maximum of 22 years in prison for his conviction on wire fraud and aggravated identity theft charges. His conviction marks another black eye for the already tarnished attorney who rose to national fame during the Trump administration as a vocal foe of the president while he was representing Daniels. He even flouted running for president against Trump in 2020 as he was reportedly dubbed the savior of the republic. Avenatti is scheduled to be sentenced on May 24th. Jack, I like all the little innuendo writings there. That was pretty good. In international,
of the Republic.
Yeah, in international news, Ottawa Mayor Jim Watson on Sunday declared a state of emergency to help deal with an unprecedented 10-day occupation by protesting truckers that has shut down much of the core the Canadian capital. Watson, who complained earlier in the day that the demonstrators outnumbered police and controlled the situation, did not give details of what measures he might impose. Amid residents' fury at the lack of official response, Ottawa police relocated some protesters and put up fresh barricades on Sunday, saying they are collecting financial, digital, vehicle registrations and other evidence that will be used in criminal prosecutions. End quote. The Freedom Convoy began as a movement against the Canadian vaccine requirement for cross-border truckers, but has turned into a rallying point against public health measures and Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's government. There's a lot more to that story that we will get into in a little bit. And international efforts to defuse the standoff over Ukraine intensified Monday, with French President Emmanuel Macron set to hold talks in Moscow and German Chancellor Olaf Scholz in Washington to coordinate policies as fear of a Russia invasion mount. The concentration of an estimated 100,000 Russian troops near Ukraine has fueled Western worries that it heralds a possible offensive. White House National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan warned Sunday that Russia could invade Ukraine, quote unquote, any day. Not imminent, but it's any day. Triggering a conflict that would come at an enormous human cost, he also said. Russia has denied any plans to attack its neighbor, but is urging the U.S. and its allies to bar Ukraine and other ex-Soviet nations from joining NATO, halt weapons deployments there, and roll back NATO forces from Eastern Europe. Washington and NATO have rejected the demands. Indirect talks between the United States and Iran will begin on Tuesday in Vienna in an effort to revive their nuclear deal of 2015. The European Union will oversee and coordinate the talks. Envoys have headed to their home countries 10 days ago in preparation for these discussions. Activists from the group Last Generation staged a protest this morning, gluing their bodies to Germany's main motorway, causing traffic jams and backups for the rush hour traffic. They are demanding a law against food waste and cuts in greenhouse gas emissions from agriculture. They previously placed food that had been discarded on the 8100 motorway in another form of protest. In tech news, Spotify CEO Daniel Ek told staffers Sunday that the company will not be canceling Joe Rogan after a clip of the podcaster using the N-word went viral. Ek explained his position on Rogan in a lengthy letter to employees that criticized Rogan's comments, but fell short of taking action against the controversial host. Rogan, 54, dropped the N-word almost 24 times while hosting his wildly popular podcast, The Joe Rogan Experience, according to newly unearthed clips. The podcaster called the viral compilation, quote, the most regretful and shameful thing I have ever had to talk about publicly, end quote, on Friday, saying the video was a collage of out-of-text snippets from 12 years of conversations. In business news, Swedish company PriceRunner is suing Google for €2.1 billion or $2.4 billion after a European court ruled Google violated antitrust laws. The controversy stemmed after the court ruled Google guilty of favoring its own products and services over rivals and was given a fine of $2.8 billion. Google has launched 2 appeals to the initial court decision. PriceRunner believes this is an ongoing issue and expects the final amount to be much higher than the 2.1 billion euros they're suing for. And it'll be higher every day they await trial because it's an ongoing occurrence. And in holiday news, today is National Send a Card to a Friend Day, National Ballet Day, and E-Day, as in just like pi, the number with 2.718. Those are your headlines. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Pelly. All right. Something that caught my eye that I wanted to talk about.
Go for it.
You know the best way to make sure your voice is heard?
Screaming?
No.
Hide your lungs?
No.
Hard as possible?
No. Gorilla glue to the asphalt.
That's the way. That's the way. Okay.
Yeah. You lay down on a highway and you glue yourself to the highway in front of rush hour traffic.
That's the way your voice gets heard, or is that the way you get basically ran over by a car?
Well, no one got ran over. I mean, a lot of people were upset in Germany because they couldn't get into work. Supposedly, there were videos surfacing because they tried to glue themselves down in 4 different locations. And one of the locations was pretty much unsuccessful with them gluing down. So there are videos of people being fed up in their cars, getting out of their cars, and dragging people by their hoods of their backpacks or their sweatshirts.
Yeah.
And they just drag them out throw them out of the way and let some cars go. And then they'd get back in there and they'd try to lay down again. And the next round of people would just drag them back out.
Oh, man, that is so weird.
And they are protesting. They're trying to get a law against food waste and cuts in greenhouse gas emissions from agriculture. And this is their most recent display.
What was their other ones?
Their other one was they took discarded food, I assume from like a grocery store, because grocery stores have to throw out food pretty consistently.
A ton of
So
it.
they
I think
took
in the U.S. it's like 50%.
discarded food,
Yeah.
and like laid it all out on the highways as like a food barrier.
Do you think those protests work to the... I mean, we're talking about it. And, what's the point of a protest if not to make people aware of something that's going on? So I guess on that sense, the fact that we're talking about it has some level of gravity, but success, not so much.
I think the Freedom Convoy is successful.
Mm-hmm.
I think that this is not. Because they're trying to do the same thing, but they just don't have the power of the numbers.
Yeah.
And what happens is we talk about it, but the government doesn't, essentially.
Yeah, just ignores it.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, they're going to get publicity, but so what?
They're going to get some publicity, and then the most federal of a response you're going to get is some police officers that come out and drag you out. So that's it.
So if you're going to do a protest, the way to do it is be in the way, like so in the way that you can't, it's like you have to acknowledge, you have to deal with these people. You can't just drag them out and then take them back.
Yeah, all of that.
Yeah.
But like peaceful. I'm just going to state that because the Freedom Convoy so far has been very peaceful. And this is actually something I want to get into with our guest later because the reporting that's coming from it,
racist, sexist,
abhorrent,
bigoted. Yeah.
They're flying Nazi flags.
Yeah.
They're flying Confederate flags in Canada.
Yeah. Pretty much, yeah.
They're lighting firecrackers. They're assaulting officers. That's what the reporting's saying, which is nothing from what's actually coming out of Canada. That's what the NPR is saying.
Yeah.
And other U.S. Western or U.S. left outlets.
It's weird. It's almost like they're trying to conflate it with like Trump-esque stuff.
They are.
That's basically what it's trying to do. And it's almost like they're trying to do that by saying, okay, these people are anti-vaxxers. And because they're anti-vaxxers, they fit within this box of people. It seems like they're trying to do that. I don't know. I mean, for an American audience, maybe it works.
Tickets have been issued. Some vehicles have been towed.
Mm-hmm. But no, not violent and everything else in the way that they're trying to describe it. Yeah.
Not at all.
It's been relatively peaceful.
They're basically getting ready for rounds of prosecutions after this is done because they want to put people in jail. And guess what? We've seen this before. Guess what's going to happen? They're going to await trial. They're going to be sitting in jail for 2 years and just await trial because their sin is the fact that they don't like something.
Well, see, this is Canada, though. I mean, they may not respond to it in the same way America responded to it. I mean, how many arrests have been made so far for the Canadian thing? Like you said, there hasn't been, meaning this is not a raid on the Capitol, right? This is people, ish. These are people who are in their trucks going to it in order to create a protest, to create enough. Basically, you have to pay attention to us. You can't just ignore us. It's kind of like in France. In France, they used to take like, France has the best protests that I think I've ever seen. They would take the cows into the middle of the highway and just leave the cows like that because the farmers were angry about something that was taking place. But that was their way of doing it. France used to protest anything on the drop of a dime. But it doesn't come across as if these guys are doing anything violent or aggressive. It comes across as if they're just in the way. It's almost like a sit-in, but with truckers. And so I don't necessarily know what kind of prosecutions they're going to be able to do for something like this outside of the oddball person who might have went too far.
Well, think about the January 6th people are currently being locked up on trespassing charges.
Yes.
Without denied bail on trespassing charges?
I guess that's what I'm saying. But is that the same thing as what's taking place in Ottawa? Like, for example, the U.S. government, prosecutors and everything else, because of the uproar of these people basically raiding the Capitol. Well, they have feelings about it because it's the Capitol. And for the president and everything else, meaning there was this kind of large significance of the events of January 6th. Not to mention adding Donald Trump basically trying to take the election. That's not happening in Canada, though. Like, Canada doesn't have all of that stuff interacting with that particular indication. Yes, they're using the language as if these guys are like Trumpers or whatever. By the same token, though, but the other stuff isn't there for it in order to make that argument work in a way that I think it would need to be there in order to make that argument work. There's been nothing to attack the Canadian government at this point.
The criticisms, actually one of the main criticisms that's come out of this as well is that It started out as like a trucker protest, because you're trying to vaccinate our industry,
right?
And we don't want that.
And expand.
And now they're saying like, oh, it started out so pure of truckers, but it turned into a let's hate Trudeau party.
Yeah.
Which I understand. It probably, like, there's been a lot of signs going out of like overthrow Trudeau.
Right.
I get that, but
it always evolves.
What does that matter? What does it matter if you're not in the whole point of going from the city to city to city through to Ottawa was to accrue more people along the way.
Right.
And they did just that. So it doesn't seem like a big issue really to say like, oh, it's different than what it started at. It's not these same people.
Yeah, look, in the same way that those people have every right to protest, the people who dislike the fact that they're going to protest are going to say whatever they got to say about it. And they're going to use whatever language in order to cast it in a particular light because they don't like the fact that those people are protesting. So do they have an interest or do they have a incentive to be like, those people are racist and sexist, and those people are just like Donald Trump, and those people are... Yes, of course they're going to do that because they're trying to shape the image. They're trying to frame it for people who aren't necessarily there and people who haven't made a decision one way or the other on it. But is that indicative of what it is? Not necessarily. I mean, the Yellow Vest movement started off very specific as the gas tax. It escalated to Macron needs to leave. That's just protests. All protests do that for the most part, especially when you get a huge number of people. They start feeling themselves in their weight, and they're like, yeah, I know we were here because of the vaccines, but, Trudeau needs to leave. It becomes that. And so it is what it is, right? I mean, the question for them, they can't really do anything about people trying to cast them in one way or the other. The only thing they can do is try to stay true to whatever they're doing it for and to try to keep violence down. Meaning you don't want a situation like on January 6th. You want something where you're organized. Back in the old civil rights days, these guys used to go out in protest in suits. It's like they were walking around the hot Georgia sun and they're full, retired, just walking out, holding signs, I am a man. And you're doing that because you don't want them to be able to say, oh, look at those thugs or look at that, whatever. No, those people are formal, they're serious, wearing suits, etc. And so I would imagine the same thing is true for them or would have to be true. You don't want violence. You don't want people getting injured. You don't want property damage. You want it to be very specific to the issue of the vaccinations. And yeah, they're going to try to cast you in all sorts of ways. You can't really care about that. You have to stay very specific to your interests and keep those people on board and online. And up to this point, it hasn't necessarily seemed like it's been all that violent.
It really hasn't.
Yeah. It's actually been pretty, as a protest goes, it's Canadian protests. You know what I mean, right? Canada has this
you going a boat up to Ottawa over there? Yeah. Oh, so sorry to get in your way.
Right.
One quick prediction from you.
Go for it.
Because I know we'll actually have our expert on later. No, I'm asking for your prediction.
Yeah.
Do you think that now we're like over a week in? Now, because the people of Ottawa are not happy.
No, they're not.
But remember, they were welcoming them with open arms when they first came. And they were helping them out. They were getting them food and water. And hey, why don't you here's some extra lodging here?
I think some of them were doing that.
Right.
Yeah.
But now it's like, oh man, our city's been on lockdown for a long time.
Right.
It's hard to get anywhere, do anything.
Yeah.
And I need to go to work. I need to make some money.
Right.
Do you think the protesters are going to win out of the government right now? Because right now,
the government's going to win out.
Really?
Yeah, because the overwhelming majority of it depends on what you mean by win out. So let's put a pin there first. But look, the problem with the protests is a problem with every protest. There's a certain amount of energy that takes that protest to sustain itself. Meaning it takes a huge amount of energy to get all of those people out there in the cold, in the weather, out there for hours, etc. And then to repeat that over and over and over again, or to keep that up for days.
With frozen funds.
With frozen funds, right. And so it makes it difficult to do. That energy is not easy to sustain, whereas the government basically needs to wait it out. Also, you get this other public pressure thing where, let's say you get 30% of the population that agrees with you because they hate the vaccinations and everything else. If 60% doesn't, then the majority of the people aren't there with you. The majority of the people actually want the government to get involved, and they don't want you to basically make their lives miserable.
Right, but it's not... I get that it's turned into a pro-vaccine, anti-vaccine, Trudeau,
that's basically
anti-Trudeau.
What it's being cast as.
But as the government, if I'm trying to end this, I could probably say, okay, let's roll back the vaccine mandate on truckers because as an industry that makes sense. They're isolated, and then the huge majority of what's physically blocking your city will go leave.
Right.
Because they're the truckers.
I know, but typically governments don't necessarily like to acquiesce to demand unless they have to. Unless it's something where it's like, do you remember back during the time where Donald Trump basically said, I'm not going to pay the airline workers or something to that effect? And it had something to do with, I forget why, he was shutting the government down for something, but the airline workers, what if the airline workers said, well, fine, we're not coming into work? What if they said that? And all of the airlines in the United States shut down? The government has to do something in that situation. I mean, there's no way the government is going to be able to function without the airlines. And so if there was something similar in Canada where there was no choice, meaning there was no other option, then maybe. But the way this is set up, I don't think that's going to be the case. I mean, and governments don't tend to like to acquiesce. It's almost like a hostage crisis in a weird way, unless they're forced to do so. I don't think the truckers are going to have the bang for the buck or the stamina to go as long as they would need to go in order to get gains. And I don't think they have enough public support in order to make that work. But I could be wrong.
Okay.
We'll see.
Yeah, we will.
You guys are listening to Fault Lines, Thomas and Pelly. Wait, what's your prediction? You never gave one. You just asked.
I think that the truckers will win out to a degree.
What's that degree?
I think the government's going to win out overall whole-handedly.
Do you think the government is going to give anything in this situation? Tough one.
I think that they should.
Yeah.
Not even the fact that, like, okay, I'm a fan of this protest and all that.
Yeah.
I just think the fact that there's that many people there that are putting their jobs, their occupation, and essentially their records on the line because you're going to go after them with criminal charges.
Yeah.
They should contend with it. Also, it would make it just easier for Ottawa to move on. Just to give them something.
Yeah.
Just a little something.
Okay. We'll see. All right.
But I think Trudeau is just willing to sacrifice the efficiency of Ottawa for 2-3 weeks if he has to.
Yeah.
And then climb up from the negative ratings after.
You're like, all right, what's next?
Yeah. Conveniently, I got COVID again. I can't come into Ottawa again.
Right. A second bout of COVID. All right. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Pelly. You got both of our predictions. We will be back in a moment.
Fault Lines.
Hi, I'm political analyst Garland Nixon.
And I'm political scientist, author, and nationally syndicated columnist Dr. Wilmer Leon.
We're the co-hosts for The Critical Hour, airing Monday through Friday from 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern Time here on Radio Sputnik in Washington, D.C.
We close out your day with a thorough and hard-hitting analysis of the day's top stories where we bring in brilliant scholars, authors, and investigative journalists from around the world.
And on Fridays, it's panel time, when we do a roundup of the week's most important issues.
Join us to keep up with the world's top stories.
Enjoy an in-depth analysis.
And have a little fun along the way. Listen to our show.
The Critical Hour, Monday through Fridays on Radio Sputnik.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined with my co-host, Austin Pelly, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. If you guys happen to find yourself in the D.C. area, you can catch us on radio at 105.5 FM and 1390 AM. We're also kicking around in Kansas City at 102.9 FM and 104.7 FM. If you guys are digging what Austin and I are putting down, whatever platform you're consuming this content on, give us a like and share that audio or video. If you want to join in on the conversation, you can do so with a chat, a tweet, and of course, you can reach us by phone at 202-521-1320. Your engagement helps make the show what it is, so definitely don't be shy. And as we mentioned in the headlines, Michael Avenatti has been convicted. He's basically stealing from a porn star or a previous porn star, and he has been convicted for doing so. Right here, he says, I am very disappointed in the jury's verdict. He said after he left the courthouse, I look forward to a full adjudication on all of the issues and appealed. Michael Avenatti, right here, the deliberations went for about 3 days, and it was uncertain where the jury was going to go, but eventually they convicted him. And the jury convicted him of wire fraud and aggravated identity theft, basically agreeing with accusations that he used a bogus letter to trick Stormy Daniels, literary agent, into sending him almost $300,000 in publisher's payment, basically her money. As he went to trial, he tried to make this argument that because she believes in spirituality and she believes she talks to the dead, that somehow precludes her from being cognizant of the fact that he stole $300,000 from her. I tell you this, you can talk to the dead, you can talk to Casper, you can think you're talking to aliens, you can think all that stuff. And you could still be completely lucid enough to realize that this person has stolen money from you. I don't necessarily see why Avenatti thought that there was going to be an argument that worked. It did not. What I want to point to, though, is for people who were alive more than, 2-3 years ago, think back. What do you know of Avenatti? Avenatti was basically the liberals' warrior. That was the guy. That was the liberals' gladiator. Liberals love this guy. And for the longest time, they was like, wow, he goes after Trump full bore. They loved him. They even went as far as saying that the convicted criminal here was presidential material. And that was the guy who Democrats needed to go after Donald Trump. Let's play the clip. Liberals loved this convicted former lawyer. Clip.
He's out there saving the country.
You know what?
He's a rock star, I think.
Michael Avenatti's a beast.
You're like the Holy Spirit. You are all places at all times.
Sitting beside me right now, I'm not going to let you cheat. You have to guess. And hint, his name is Michael Avenatti.
Here's something else. Michael Avenatti, I'd like to meet you sometime over at dinner.
You got lucky tonight. We're back with attorney Michael Avenatti. He is a main player.
Looking ahead to 2020, one reason why I'm taking you seriously as a contender is because of your presence on cable news.
We've done this. It's great.
I'm taking you seriously as a presidential contender because you've been all over cable news. That's exactly why I'm taking you serious. Well, the person, Michael Avenatti, is the Holy Ghost. It's the Holy Ghost. Okay, that's great. And why did they think this? They thought this again because Avenatti would go after Donald Trump. And liberals, the only thing they needed to get out of bed in the morning, and the only thing they needed to make that person a presidential contender is that they would go after Trump. Scruples? Nope. Morality? Nope. Ethics? Legal? Or otherwise? Nope. Didn't need any of that. He was angry, he was cantankerous, and he hated Trump. That was enough. And that found itself to be lacking. Austin, this gets into what I think is a severe problem for Democrats. And I don't think they've learned their lesson yet. Avenatti had nothing else going for him. It wasn't an issue of policy. They knew none of his policies. There wasn't an issue of what does Avenatti want for the country. That didn't have anything to do with it. Avenatti didn't want anything for the country. Avenatti wanted that porn star's $300,000, basically. But my point is, you have all of these people who are basically saying this guy's presidential. They know nothing about this guy. And all of it was basically, once again, organized around Trump. Even in their opposition, we don't care about the country. We just like the fact that he's angry against Trump. This is all their problems, man. And you know, at some point, Trump is not going to be here. You're not going to be able to run against Trump forever.
Really?
At some point, somebody should tell him that. And Avenatti is a perfect example of that reality.
I mean, it's a clear-cut case of just identity politics.
Oh, yeah.
Why are you a great candidate? Because I'm on the news. Why are you a great
Right.
candidate? Because I'm going to hit that dude with the crazy hair and the orange face. Yeah, let's do it.
He's presidential.
He's our savior. He's the Holy Spirit. Come on.
He's the Holy Spirit. Think about that. He's the Holy Spirit. And again, why? Because he's going after Trump.
Yeah.
That's all they need. Like,
if that's the case, if they set that precedent, then man, the left media, they're all prophets.
Yes.
Right now. They are just Jesus in disguise, Chris Cuomo and the rest of them, because that's all they've been doing.
Yes.
Just going after Trump.
Yep. Policy, not so much.
No.
This notion of, hey, what do we want for the country? Not so much.
And then when they try to shift and they go after Biden says, hey, guys, that's not what you're supposed to do. It's a little too harsh.
Yes.
No, I'm not him. And they go, oh, okay. Back to Trump.
Our bad. We'll go back. We'll go back. Yeah. I mean, look, I would say Avenatti is the poster boy for everything wrong with, I would say, what's considered to be the political left in Congress, or for that matter, just on media and everything else. There's more to being a president and to being a presidential contender than whether or not you hate Trump. And until you get that through your head, you're going to have these kind of weird videos, which you're basically saying the guy that just got convicted of stealing $300,000 from a porn star, that guy is presidential, and that you want that guy to basically run with your insignia on his back. Good luck. That is utterly and entirely embarrassing.
Mm-hmm.
That's so embarrassing. Let's do this. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Pelly. We're coming back. We're going to have this conversation that we tried to have last week with this notion of Russia and China, basically Putin meeting Xi Jinping, and trying to get this kind of Chinese perspective on the events that are taking place in the Ukraine. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Pelly. We'll be back in a moment.
Fault Lines.
24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We give you the most essential information out there. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Are you bored? Are you lonely? Do you need a hug? Well, we can't give you that, but we can keep you up to date on Radio Sputnik.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined with my co-host, Austin Pelly, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. And we are trying to get our guest on the line for whatever reason. Despite me contacting him earlier, he seems to be not around. Look, from the standpoint of the Avenatti thing real quick, why do you think that they haven't gotten to their heads yet that, okay, we need something more than Trump? Is it just they've gotten so dependent that it's kind of like an easy, I don't know, an easy hit point or easy organizing point that they just kind of ran with that?
Well, as long as there's a possibility of Trump in the future,
yeah,
they have a headline.
Yeah.
They have something to write home about. And it sells copies. I say that with an asterisk because their viewers are going down like crazy.
That's kind of my point. Like if you're thinking of, like it's one thing if this plan had benefits. It doesn't. I mean, it might have had benefit when Trump was in office, and you could kind of make that argument about, okay, well, this guy's getting this wrong, or this guy's doing this, or this guy may potentially take over the country.
Well,
but he's out of office.
What else are they going to do? Are they going to hit their president, quote unquote, their president, and what he's doing, and all the good things he's doing for during his presidency?
Yeah.
No. Are they going to hit their Congress that they have their majority and is dropping the ball constantly, and no. Are they going to hit their Democratic split that's tearing their party apart? No. To a degree, they cover all those things. To a degree, there's always like some little rose-colored glasses while they're looking at them. But if they don't focus on something that the right's doing, and guess who's the biggest player? The ones that you tagline, hear the name, and you're like, oh, I have an opinion on him. It's Trump.
Yeah.
And as long as he's planning on running for 2024, or at least that rumor's out, they have something to focus on to take the pressure off themselves.
Oh, man. It just doesn't seem like it's been successful. I'll put it that way. I mean, if you're looking at Biden's polling, if you're looking at what's her name's polling, if you're looking at even the way the party is seen in general, even if you're looking at the next midterms and what's expected, that doesn't seem to work. And yet they're continuing to dig that ditch further and further down. It's just very bizarre. And you would think at some point they would say, hey, we need to correct this. This doesn't necessarily seem to be doing what we want it to do. I mean, you already have the January 6th commission, and that's still kind of puttering along. But at some point, got to change that. And you have to focus on this notion of what is best for the country as a whole. And they don't seem to be there. It seems that they're just kind of going with what's the low-hanging fruit. Mm-hmm. And the low-hanging fruit is just mentioning Trump and just going after Trump.
You know, speaking of low-hanging fruit, I kind of have to hit this one little tidbit story here.
Go for it.
About Russia and Putin and Xi Jinping.
Yeah.
I just remember seeing as like the very first headline when Putin was with Xi, yeah, I can say, at the opening ceremonies. Apparently, Putin fell asleep during the opening ceremonies.
Really?
Which at first I was like, oh, he's taking a note from Joe Biden. Cool. But then I looked into it, and apparently he fell asleep as the Ukrainian athletes were coming out.
Really? That's funny.
So, as their team was, like, all of a sudden his eyes are closed and he's slumped
quote,
back.
unquote, fell asleep. Right.
Right. So that's like a very, I don't know, it's a little ex-boyfriend passive aggressiveness going on there.
A little bit of trolling. Oh, that's funny. That's funny. I mean, but do you want people to think you fell asleep? Maybe not. Maybe there's another way to do that. I mean, like you said, if it was one of those things where it looked like he did that, he's basically just snubbing The Ukrainian team. Have you been watching the Olympics in general?
No. Okay. I watch the summer ones pretty a lot.
Yeah.
Mostly. I don't really watch the winter ones all that much.
They're impressive. I mean, like, and then there was this question too: how is China going to handle it? Like, are they going to go all out for it? Is COVID going to have a larger implication in regards to how it's going to affect things? But look, it's the Olympics, and it's the Olympics during COVID, I suppose. This is just kind of where we are.
Did you get the feeling of during the Summer Olympics that, like, oh, the U.S. has to beat out China?
Yes.
With the medal count.
Because it's a competition, right? It's this, that's one of the best aspects of it.
Do you know the U.S. is standing right now for the winter?
What is it?
14th.
Okay. I don't know the number in regards to comparison. Like, what's the other?
We have 0 golds.
Okay.
Right now. I'm going to pull that up real quick because I was looking at it earlier because I was curious about the medal count. Like, oh, why? It's not as hyped up.
Yeah.
That's what I feel. So Sweden's in the lead right now with 3 medals, all gold. Russian athletes, because Russia can't compete in these. Russian athletes have 6 medals, 2 gold. The Netherlands, Germany, Norway, Canada, Japan, China at 8, and the U.S. at 14 with 3 medals, but all silver.
Okay.
So.
Yeah, from a nation or competitive nation thing, yeah, I would imagine so on some level that you would want.
I mean, there's quite a few problems with the Olympics, and there's the whole like Olympic curses, and whenever you bring in the Olympics, it basically bankrupts whatever city you're bringing it into.
Right.
Unless you already have infrastructure in place that is well maintained and you basically have to advertise and sell the Olympics. Every part of it has to be sold.
Otherwise, you're going into
these seats brought to you by Bud Light.
Yeah.
This microphone brought to you by that athlete's hangnail brought to you by Suave. No. But you basically have to sell all the aspects of the Olympics. Otherwise, you lose a lot of money.
Yeah.
So L.A., our Olympics here in L.A. historically has done very well.
Yeah.
China
already has infrastructure.
Historically has done very well.
Yeah.
When you bring it to other places, I believe Spain did it very well and actually was able to turn themselves around on it. Almost any other nation
not so much
can't do it so well.
Because you have to build that stuff. And then when the Olympics leaves, then what?
Yeah.
I guess it's still there, but you didn't really need it there the first time around. You kind of just added it because of the Olympics. I mean, there's a prestige issue, so you could say, okay, price of admission is, X or Y.
Well, yeah, but there's also, so those are all the problems with the Summer Olympics. The Winter Olympics are even harder because not all countries have the infrastructure, and nor could they keep the infrastructure going of a slalom.
Yeah.
When is that going to get used except every couple years?
Yeah.
And a lot of these countries just don't have winter sports because they don't have snow.
Yeah.
And also winter sports are a very, what is it? A lot of money. They cost a lot of money.
Oh,
it's very expensive. Yeah. They're very expensive to participate in, let alone keep all the infrastructure up for.
Yeah.
So all of that being said, like the Winter Olympics are kind of like not even the little brother of the Summer Olympics. There's not as much pressure on them. A lot of countries don't compete. You get countries like Sweden that are dominating right now.
Yeah.
And there's just not as much competition, and there are way fewer locations you can host it at. So all that being said, I'm not really watching these.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
And I'm not putting as much pressure on them. The U.S. has to outperform China or anything like that. I do know that our female skier was expected to win gold, and she abandoned her first run and then skied out of bounds on her last run.
Oh, jeez.
And so she's still the favorite for other ski events. Yeah, she dropped the ball on that.
To me, look, one of the greatest, or I think the most fun for the Olympics for me is just rooting for your country. It's like you want your country to get more goals and those type of things. Who knows what that means? But I still enjoy it. Let's do this. Let's pivot and let's hit the Joe Rogan thing. Because I don't necessarily think, for whatever reason, our guest is famously, what is the word I'm looking for? Unreliable. Let's call it that. So I don't necessarily know where he is. So let's skip. The Rogan issue, we have the clip for this. And we're going to talk about this a little bit later with Faren when she comes on at 8:15. But let's pull the Joe Rogan clip up. Rogan gives an apology. Apparently somebody puts out a video that has him saying the N-word a bunch of times over the course of his career or something like that. And his apology seemed heartfelt. He seemed legitimately, I guess, bothered by the fact that he was saying it that often. And like you said, he was like, look, man, this is not something, he said, this is basically a grotesque clip. Let's play the clip. I want him to explain it first.
Hello, friends. I'm making this video to talk about the most regretful and shameful thing that I've ever had to talk about publicly. There's a video that's out that's a compilation of me saying the N-word. It's a video that's made of clips taken out of context of me of 12 years of conversations on my podcast, and it's all smushed together, and it looked horrible, even to me. Now, I know that to most people, there's no context where a white person is ever allowed to say that word, never mind publicly on a podcast. And I agree with that now. I haven't said it in years, but for a long time, when I would bring that word up, like if it would come up in conversation, instead of saying the N-word, I would just say the word. I thought as long as it was in context, people would understand what I was doing.
All right, very straightforward. As long as it's within context, I thought people will understand.
All right, now we have this clip that we're going to play on live radio. It's the compilation of 24 times that Rogan's going to say the N-word. Okay, we ready? And go. No? Okay.
It's like beep, beep, right? It's just like beep. Yeah, look, I don't think Rogan is racist, right? And for the longest time, people have been trying to take Rogan off the air for pretty much anything that Rogan would do. And so I suspect that this is just one of those things where somebody is trying to take advantage of the, the publicity with it. Rogan, in the way that he would describe it, look, man, this stuff was contextual. In a particular moment, it was contextual. Now, there was one particular part, he made some joke about Planet of the Apes or something like that. And he was like, okay, that was horrible. It sounded like I was saying black people were apes, et cetera, et cetera. That sounds really horrendous. That's not something I would do, et cetera. And I think some of the stuff he thinks he's being edgy, right? Like, I know my wife and I, or my former wife, her and I would sit around and we may be watching TV or something. We would say something brutally racist. Now, neither one of us are racist, right? And both of us are saying it almost in the context of whatever's going on contextually at the time. I would imagine Rogan does the same, or just like other people do the same. It's like him being white doesn't preclude him from doing that, and anybody else. It may just be certain areas that are worse. And so from Rogan's standpoint, it's like, dude, you guys basically took this over the course of my career, smushed all of the stuff together, removed all the context, and just let it run.
Some people would say there is no context that makes it correct.
Yeah. And he even pointed it out. He was like, look, man, I get it. This sounds horrendous. And I would imagine it sounds horrendous.
Well, I get the whole trying to have a conversation around like the history of the N-word, when it can be used and things like that. He
was doing it out of comedy or something.
Right.
Yeah.
So, I don't know.
Because it's like, is it contextual if it's comedy? No. It seems like that's the opposite of it. I mean, it seems like comedy would be pulling it out in order to make fun of it. He wasn't having this intellectual discussion, like you're saying, on the history of the N-word and how he wasn't doing that. This wasn't that. Mm-hmm. He was basically making jokes, or he was basically talking to a guest or something to that effect. And to his credit, or to his point, he was like, look, man, that sounds horrendous. And I'm really apologizing. Like, it was a legitimate apology. It wasn't like, for anybody, he was offended by this. It wasn't that. He seemed to really take it genuinely, and is basically apologizing for it. So I accept the apology, right? I think I appreciate it. Do you think he's going to get hit for making an apology? This was a conversation the producer and I were having yesterday.
Making the apology?
Yeah. Basically saying, because you're apologizing for this, you've basically opening up yourself. You've admitted to making a mistake, and you've admitted to doing something
I don't think
wrong.
He's going to get hit for a quote-unquote apology. I think he's going to get hit because he's not like crying, oh my gosh, this is my whole career. Yeah. And I know that I've upset so many people. They're going to hit him on, he did everything but apologize. He tried to give an explanation. He tried to do this. And that's kind of par for the course.
But see, to me, this was an apology, though. He didn't say, like sometimes, for anybody who's upset, I'm sorry. He didn't do that. He just said, okay, look, this was embarrassing. This was horrendous. It sounds horrible, etc. Like, I didn't get the feeling that he was trying to justify his behavior. I got the feeling that he said, look, this was just bad. This was gross. That's the way I take it. I take it as he has probably all these people who are African-American friends. They're probably seeing this, and they're probably, finding it to be atrocious. And at this point, he just came across as if he's doing a legitimate apology. I don't know. It didn't it sounded sincere to me. How put it that way? It sounded sincere.
I honestly, I liked his explanation, but I don't think that the majority of the public would.
It's gonna work. Yeah. Let me ask you this: do you think people who are already fans of Rogan are affected one way or the other by it?
If you were a quote unquote fan of Rogan, I think that you are still a fan of Rogan.
Right.
I think that he's been controversial for years already, and he's still amassed the same amount of followers that he has.
I'll say because of it.
I mean, now you've got the issue of like Spotify CEO. Right. He came out and he said, with this whole compilation of the N-word thing, he sent out a letter, like a memoir, to all Spotify employees. He was like, "I'm so sorry if this has affected you. This is not what we stand for, but we need to honor our agreement."
Yeah.
And I don't think that censoring is the way to go.
Right.
And he put that there.
Yeah.
As of right now, he's ride or die with Rogan.
Yeah. Well, yeah, all the money that you put out. And again, I am not a big, I don't like the canceling thing, man. I mean, I don't think it helps conversation. I don't necessarily even think it helps in the context of if you're trying to protect something else. I just don't think it works. People realize that you're basically trying to shut them up. In Rogan's case, look, he'll rise or fall based on whether or not people support him afterwards. And up to this point, people support him. I mean, I don't, like, him saying that and then making this kind of compilation over the course of his entire career, I don't know. It doesn't, I don't get this feeling like, okay, Rogan is walking around as a closet racist, and Rogan has all of these blacks and everything else on, but he's only doing that because he wants to. I don't get that feeling from Rogan. And so, I don't know. Also, there's this other weird dynamic where people have been trying to go after Rogan, meaning I don't think it's a coincidence that the issue with Spotify came up, and then all of a sudden this comes up. Meaning it's very possible that somebody was like, okay, Rogan is skating on this. I know what I'm going to do. And basically goes in, put all of these in words, what he's ever said it, put it all on once and plays it. Realizing how ghastly that's going to sound and putting this kind of another attack point against Rogan. That's what it comes across to me as. But, meaning I don't think it's an organic thing and somebody just naturally, hey, look at all of these instances that Rogan did so-and-so. I don't even think it's coincidental that it's coming out immediately after the other issue with Rogan. I think all this stuff is
Can I ask a question?
Go for it.
Have you ever given an N card, an N-word card?
I don't even know what that is. What is an N-word card?
It's when your black friend tells you that, okay, you can say it once, you get an N-word pass.
No, I've never done that. I know what you're talking about now, the N-word card. Meaning it's like a pass or something, or like a, I forget the name of it, the language behind it. No, I've never given an N-word card. It's like, you can say this for 30 minutes of the day or something like that.
No.
Oh, just once.
Yeah, you get it just once. Typically, it's around the same friend.
Yeah.
Thankfully, I've never had to contend with this issue of saying it, not saying it, because like I just don't curse in general, which has made it super easy because some people say, well, if you don't use the hard R, it doesn't count.
Yeah.
Well, if you say it in a song, if you're just rapping along with the song, it doesn't count.
Right.
When does it count?
Yeah. Right.
Does it count when it gets picked later and put in a compilation video? Is that when it counts?
Oh, man. I mean,
is the hard R better than the soft A? Wait, is the hard R better than the soft R?
Hard R is always worse. Hard R is always worse. Because if you think about it, the hard R puts you back in the slave time, you know, get off my porch. It becomes that. Whereas the soft A comes across as if this is the thing that has been changed over or taken by the African-American community and turned into something, this kind of term of endearment associated with it. But I don't know, man. It's treacherous in general. Rogan clearly shouldn't have done it. I would have preferred if Rogan not just kind of try to be edgy with doing stuff like this. That's not ever going to go over well. But
should it be accepted in black culture?
Why not?
Why not? Because if you're trying to actually leave the term behind, like for example, let's say the F word, not the curse that you would think of, but let's say another word for a British cigarette.
Oh, right.
Yeah, it would also mean a homosexual.
Yeah.
That has been pretty well left behind. I'd say like a decade after or so, it was like, hey, you can't say this anymore.
But do they call each other that? Like, is there, are you sure?
Oh, I'm not sure, but I haven't heard of it like that.
Look, I have lesbian friends, I have gay friends, and they would joke with each other in the same way. Like women would call themselves B, for example. Or
yes, that is something about American culture I've always said. Like, if you take the Spanish word of that equivalent, that's almost always an insult.
Yeah.
Americans have this weird thing of like, if we say it as like a hey,
it becomes this kind of term of endearment in the way it's being used. No, I don't have an issue with African Americans. Look, when I was younger, I used to use the word a lot more. And I think people used to use it a lot more, especially in African American circles. As I've gotten older, much less so in general. And so I don't know if it's something where just people are pulling away from it. I'm not quite sure. But no, I don't have an issue with it. I mean, and maybe that's because I just grew up with it. And so it's like as you're talking to each other, it becomes this kind of term of endearment in the way that people engage with one another, or this almost like this thing amongst yourselves that you're basically engaging in. No, I don't entirely have an issue with it, even though, you know, like I said, I've gotten older, I've pulled away from basically using it. I don't know the last time I've even used it in retrospect.
We have a caller if we would like to go to them.
Absolutely.
So one of our favorite controversial guests. Stacy from Houston. I think I know where you're going to go with this. She wants to give some context to the Joe Rogan clips. So Stacy, you're on the line. What's on your mind?
Hey, so yeah, I've listened to a lot of Rogan, and he's never used the N-word in jokes or comedy. He's always used the N-word in the context of discussing the N-word or in quoting people.
Yeah.
So that's all I wanted to say.
Well, that's what he did say, too. He kind of made the point in the video where he was like, look, man, when I brought this stuff up, he said, I thought that if I had it in context, it was fine.
Right.
And, you know, he was like, you know, for some people, there's never going to be a context for it. And look, it's not, I don't believe that it's every situation. I mean, like even the Planet of the Apes thing, I guess that's not necessarily the N-word, but you can make an argument that's almost worse than the N-word. And so there's that part. But look, I accept his apology.
Just quoting someone. Okay, so does it make it okay for anyone to say the N-word on a public setting? Or,
you mean as a quote?
No, I'm just saying, is there any way normally that they can say it and it's okay?
Yeah, if you're quoting somebody.
If you're quoting it, you can say it fine.
Yeah. Like, I don't have an...
Interesting.
Meaning, if somebody is basically quoting, meaning not like a rap thing and something like that. I'm talking about if somebody is reading a quote that somebody else gave, how else are you going to get it across? Like, I guess you could say
So if we weren't on live radio, and I say it frequently, could I read out the quote of Joe Rogan,
right,
or multiple quotes of Joe Rogan, and that would be fine? And does it change if I'm white or not?
Well, oh man, that's a tough one. So for me, I give a pass if somebody is quoting something in order to get something across. Meaning, if you're reading something out, and as you're reading this thing out, let's say you're reading a historical thing, and you're reading this document that was in a newspaper back in the 15 or 1700s or something to that effect, then yeah, you get a pass for me to being able to read it. If you're just doing it just for the sake of doing it, then no, of course not. I mean, on some level, it's the sincerity of the person who's basically doing it and whether or not the person has kind of ulterior motives. And of course, that gets subjective, right? After a while, there's no way to necessarily know. But I don't necessarily know why the person is like, I would have questions about why the person is so amped up and needing to say it. It would be that part. Or it's like this kind of freeing moment where they get to say it 20 times because Rogan basically said it. How many other times Rogan said it? I
would like to know your thoughts in the comments.
Yeah.
I'd like to see what's acceptable
versus not.
What's not acceptable, when it's acceptable. For example, if you were to say, I don't know, read out the book Huck Finn in your English class.
Acceptable.
You know, with a popcorn read?
Acceptable.
Really?
Yes.
Ooh.
You're reading a book.
To Kill a Mockingbird. Or To Kill a Mockingbird.
Same. You're reading a book. It's art. Like, for example, like I had a friend of mine who was like, he used to be mad at, what's the guy who made Inglourious Bastards? I can't think of his name. He also made Django. He made, what is his name? What is his name? You know who I'm talking about.
Yes, I do.
Yeah. So he used to get mad at him because he would make movies where the person was Quentin Tarantino. Thank you. Quentin Tarantino. And he used to be mad at him saying, oh, man, he keeps using N-words in his movies. And I was like, but dude, it's the art. I mean, what's your issue with it? I don't have an issue if a person is reading Huck Finn and they...
Well, here's the thing. When you're reading it, you're reading the entire word.
Yes.
But if you're saying it out loud, you can't say it.
Wait, what do you mean? You mean if you're reading something...
If you're reading it, you're not reading it as that N-word,
right,
Jim.
You're just reading it.
You're just reading it.
Right.
So
what's the difference?
So I would say why the change it when you're reading it out loud?
Well, to me, when you're reading it, you're just kind of faithfully reflecting the art and whatever the art was. If you're basically just saying it, then that's coming basically from you. That's the difference.
Well, it's like when, let's take Alec Baldwin, for example. When you're in an old Western movie or something like that, the actor has to say it because it's that time frame. You're representing that period. So, and I don't think we have a problem with that as a society.
No, I don't.
Because they're representing, like, that's not them. They're representing a different time period.
Right.
So
they're just faithfully reenacting whatever they're experiencing.
Imagine if it was like, if they had to say exactly the N-word in movies
Man,
of like Westerns.
That would be horrible.
And yeah.
Yeah, that would just take you out of it. No, I don't have an issue with that. I mean, my issue comes along more so people just kind of saying it because they want to get it off their chest or say it. Or for that matter, they're just doing it because they want to do it. No, I don't have an issue with this kind of faithful recreation of art associated with it like that. But that's not what Rogan was doing.
Right. Let's actually bring in Brave, who has a comment on this N-word discussion here. Brave from Atlanta, I believe. You're on the line. Yeah, what's on your mind?
Hey, what's going on, guys? I just want to say real quick, do you guys remember when Obama was in office, and I think it was in an interview or something like that, he was talking, and he didn't use the word. He was talking about, you know, like, I think it was like racism. I can't remember what the matter was, but he was stating, he was using the word, saying, you know, people saying it, or so it was in context of something. But after that, like the Republican Party and like the Fox News was hitting him on it, like because he used the N-word as if he was like using the N-word in some derogatory manner or something like that, right? I think there's, I don't know if you guys remember that or not, but I also thought that was hilarious. But there is a clear difference in just, you know, randomly saying it. Like some white dude just randomly, let's be honest.
Yes.
I was like on the show when he was like, hard R N-word. You know, suck my hard R N-word. It's a complete difference in that than actually,
reading something.
Saying when you're reading something or you're referring to something or even having a discussion about racism, you say, okay, we should not refer to black people as N-word, hard R.
Exactly.
In our society today, I think this is largely up to because of like liberals and the Democrats. I'll be quite honest with you, because nobody is worried about it when you watch like what's his name, the director? What's his
Clint Eastwood.
Reservoir Dogs and no, he did Reservoir Dogs.
Oh, Tarantino.
Yeah. No one's worried about it when Tarantino says it. When he's got it in his movies like slashed around, we don't care about it in rap. And I used to rap. So
well, see, that's the wild part, right? A friend of mine, an African-American friend of mine, he hated the fact that Tarantino used to do that. And my thing with him was like, dude, what's the matter? I mean, what's your issue? I mean, it's an art, it's a character, meaning the character is going to reflect what that character is. And you're going to have some people who are great. You're going to have some people who are not. And whatever that spectrum is, you're going to have some people on that spectrum who have no issue using that term with a hard R. So shouldn't you reflect that in the art if that's what that character is? He didn't care. I think it's perfectly fine in that sense. Brave, thanks, my man. I appreciate it.
Well, Brave, real quick, can I get your take on, you think this is going to give more credence to the cancel Joe Rogan push here? Is this going to, do you see that him fading out of the controversy with the COVID takes, but maybe not with the N-word because, you know, America cares so much about race in general?
I hope not, because they're trying really hard. Trying really hard to get him off the scene. And I think this is more not about misinformation or because Joe Rogan is clearly not racist and all that stuff.
Yeah, I don't buy that.
It's about big pharma's put a lot of money into advertising their drugs. And this show has a very large following, and I would imagine that it's hurting their sales, which is why they rolled out their corporate spokespeople in CNN, MSNBC, and all the other channels.
That's an interesting point. So do you think they're doing this because of his vaccine? Meaning, do you think they're doing this because of his vaccine position? Basically, Rogan was clearly, really loud on this notion of, they were calling it misinformation. But do you think it's because of that? Like that they're trying to get rid of him on this?
No, I think it's because, again, Pfizer and Moderna, Pfizer especially spent a lot of money. And CNN already hated them, right? Pfizer spent a lot of money in advertising. There's a clip. There's a clip, a combination of a compilation of ads brought to you by Pfizer, shows brought to you by Pfizer, news brought to you by Pfizer. I think everyone has seen it at this point, and it lets you how much.
Brave, we're gonna have to close it. Thank you, my man. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Pelly. We'll be back in a moment.
listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Fault lines.
Live from the divided states of America, precipitously perched at the edge of this resilient and exploited globe. Welcome to your context lens for the American perspective. In the left corner, I am your ever vigilant, your indefatigable political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
And in the right corner, I'm the Wagyu in the world of wingers, both left and right, your political analyst, Austin Pelly.
That means you are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Pelly. Wagyu, like the beef?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Like the
Japanese
creme de la creme.
Yeah.
The chef's kiss.
Yes. It's like they give the cow beers and stuff like that. They massage the cows.
Massage the cows, yeah.
Right. Oh, man. Have you ever had Wagyu?
I have had it because there's this controversy around like real Wagyu versus not real Wagyu, and it really is only like Kobe is the real Wagyu. I've had genuine Wagyu once, and it was it came out basically on a platter that you would sizzle it yourself.
It's like
So give it to you raw.
$100 for like a tiny amount of it. How was it worth it? I guess is the question.
Anything, I would say it's worth it once to try it. It'd be like, man, that's a good steak. If you are actually splurging to do it, it's not worth it.
Okay.
But if you make $400,000, like go for it.
It's like if you're traveling, you're in Japan. I'm only gonna live once.
I mean, I pretty much have a policy of try any food once.
Yeah.
So I was like, oh, heard of this? It's been amazing. It's like $60 for like 4 slices.
Insane amount expensive. Yeah.
Yeah, and it was good. Would I pay $60 for 4 slices of an appetizer? Not again.
Wow.
Unless I'm in Japan.
Avoid ostrich. Ostrich is disgusting.
You've had ostrich?
Yeah.
Where did you have that?
Australia. I was in Sydney, Australia. They had kangaroo. Kangaroo is good. But ostrich was, oh man, brutal. That bird is disgusting. But let's do this. Let's get into the headlines. In the news, yesterday in the United States, there were 295,922 new COVID cases reported, along with 2,565 new deaths. Over the past week, there's been an average of about 298,641 cases per day, a decrease of 57% from the average 2 weeks ago. 64% of the total American public has been fully vaccinated, and 75% of residents have received at least 1 dose. As of this morning, the coronavirus has infected 76,419,014 people across the United States and has killed an unfortunate 901,405 men, women, and children in this country. In national news, the White House this morning released a highly anticipated report from its labor task force that includes nearly 70 recommendations on how the government can help workers join labor unions and bargain collectively. These include the government offering greater access to federal workforce for unions, seeking to build membership, and pushing agencies such as the National Labor Relations Board and the Federal Labor Relations Authority to work closely together to facilitate worker organizing. The 43-page report also pushes the Labor Department to ensure workers who age or allege retaliation when engaged in organizing receive full protection and prevent the misclassification of workers as independent contractors, a long-running battle with so-called gig economy workers. Here's the thing, if Biden really wanted to do this, he could have put out, what is it called, the Pro-Workers Act or the Pro-Work Act or something to that effect. But basically, it was a bill that they wanted to use in order to strengthen unions. Biden could have pushed for it. He didn't push for it. And so it's like, okay, we're going to do this stuff around the edges, but the real thrust of what we can do in order to really back unions, we're not going to touch. This political stuff is aggravating. It's like, yeah, what's going to have more bang for the buck? You directly pushing for the PRO Act, or you putting an agency to basically do it on the sides. Clearly, the agency on the side is not going to have the same bang for the buck as the PRO Act. The point that I'm making here is this is a politics thing or a political thing. No, we're not going to push for it. But yes, we're going to act as if we can push for it, or that this organization or this administration has done something on this notion of labor unions.
Well, I mean, we'll see. We'll see if people get to actually use this, or is this going to be just like a facade?
Yeah, I think it's a facade.
Like the Whistleblowers Act, you know?
I don't doubt that there'll be some people who may be helped by it. But that's a difference between, okay, Biden is pushing hard for labor unions, and so Biden is pushing for the PRO Act, versus Biden is not pushing hard for labor unions, but Biden wants to say he pushed for labor unions, hence this. There's a difference in those things. Attorney turned criminal, Michael Avenatti was convicted on Friday of swiping nearly $300,000 in book advance money from his then client, Stormy Daniels. The now twice convicted felon and one-time rising star now faces a maximum of 22 years in prison for his conviction on wire fraud and an aggravated identity theft charges. His conviction marks another black eye for an already tarnished attorney who rose to national fame during the Trump administration as a vocal foe of the president while he was representing Daniels. He even floated running for president against Trump in 2020 as he was reportedly dubbed, quote, the savior of the republic, unquote. Avenatti is scheduled to be sentenced on May 24th. Savior of the republic, the Holy Spirit, as they called him. In international news, Ottawa Mayor Jim Watson on Sunday declared a state of emergency to help deal with an unprecedented 10-day occupation by protesting truckers that has shut down much of the core of Canadian capital. Watson, who complained earlier in the day that demonstrations outnumbered police and controlled the situation, did not give details on what measures he might impose. Amid residents' fury at the lack of official response, Ottawa police relocated some protesters and put up fresh barricades on Sunday, saying they are, quote, collecting financial, digital, and vehicle registration and other evidence that will be used in criminal prosecutions, unquote. The Freedom Convoy began as a movement against Canadian vaccine requirement for cross-border truckers, but has turned into a rally point against public health measures and Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's government. I want to come back to that because I really dislike the criminal prosecution stuff, especially if they are not doing anything wrong.
Well, you know, the statement for Ottawa's in a state of emergency, the justification was that there's a significant increase in violence here, that these protesters are dangerous. Like, that's why we need to lock down.
Yeah.
Not the fact that, like, oh, the city can't operate right now.
Yeah, the city can't function with as many people
It's saying that these are aggressive, hostile people, like enemies of the state, essentially. That's why the city's in lockdown.
And that's the justification they're basically using, announcing we're going to prosecute people for X and Y. I mean, look, if it's one thing if it's a protest. It's another thing if they're actually doing something nefarious. I don't necessarily think they're doing anything nefarious, short of just kind of making their grievances known to the state. You shouldn't prosecute people just for protesting. And that's where that line is for me. International efforts to defuse the standoff over Ukraine intensified on Monday with French President Emmanuel Macron set to hold talks in Moscow and German Chancellor Olaf Scholz in Washington to coordinate policies as fears of Russian invasion mounts. The concentration of an estimated 100,000 Russian troops near Ukraine has fueled Western worries that it heralds a possible offensive. White House National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan warned Sunday that Russia could invade Ukraine any day, quote unquote, triggering a conflict that would come at, quote, enormous human costs, unquote. Russia has denied any plans to attack its neighbor, but is urging the United States and its allies to ban Ukraine and other Soviet nations from joining NATO, halt weapons deployment there, and roll back NATO forces from Eastern Europe. Washington and NATO have rejected those demands. Indirect talks between the United States and Iran will begin on Tuesday in Vienna in an effort to revive the nuclear deal of 2015. The European Union would oversee and coordinate the talks. Envoys have headed to their home countries 10 days ago in preparation for these discussions. Activists from the group Last Generation staged a protest this morning, gluing their bodies to German main motorway, causing traffic jams and backup for rush hour traffic. They're demanding a law against food waste and cuts in greenhouse gas emissions from agriculture. The previously placed food that has been discarded on the A100 motorway in another form of protest. Wow. In tech news, Spotify CEO Daniel Ek told staffers on Sunday that the company will not be canceling Joe Rogan after a clip of the podcaster using the N-word went viral. Ek explained his position on Rogan in a lengthy letter to employees that criticized Rogan's comments but fell short of taking action against the controversial host. Rogan, 54, dropped the N-word almost 24 times, while hosting his wildly popular podcast, The Joe Rogan Experience, according to new unearthed clips. The podcaster called the viral compilation, quote, the most regretful and shameful thing I ever had to talk about publicly, unquote, on Friday, saying the video was a collage of out-of-context snippets from 12 years of conversations. Yes, both of those things are true. Swedish company PriceRunner is suing Google for 2.1 billion euros, or $2.4 billion for our American audience, after a European court ruled Google violated antitrust laws. The controversy stemmed after the court ruled that Google was guilty of favoring its own products and services over other rivals and was given a fine of $2.8 billion. Google has launched 2 appeals to the court's decision. Pricerunner believes it is an ongoing issue and expects the final amount to be much higher. Every day, they await trial. In holiday news, we have Grenada Independence Day. We have National Black HIV and AIDS Awareness Day. And in Mexico, it is Constitution Day. Those are your headlines. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Pelly. So, if you remember correctly, the Swedish company Pricerunner, Amazon gets hit with this also, where Amazon basically prioritizes its own products. I mean, after all, if you're on Amazon's website, Amazon knows what their competition is doing. They knows the products that are selling extremely well. And they have all the money in the world to be able to say, hey, I like that product you have there, so I'm going to put your product on page 10, and I'm going to put our product that does exactly the same thing on page 2. Thank you very much. Meaning they have that clout and power to be able to do that. And I guess Google, at a certain point, has the same capability of doing that.
Well, there was a case that I had watched of some company of, I think it was like a toiletry bag or something. Really great product. Everyone loved it. They had 5-star reviews. They put it on Amazon. Same thing. It was like top of the boards.
Yeah.
Like genuine Italian leather, things like that. Don't quote me on it being a toiletry bag.
Right.
And then all of a sudden, they noticed that Amazon Basics came out with basically the same bag,
product,
just a little bit cheaper material. And all of a sudden was the Amazon recommended.
Yes.
It was the #1 option, and they were on like page 3.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, their sales went down like crazy.
Yeah.
Especially because for whatever ads they run, they can run an ad on TV or something to which someone would go to Amazon and say, oh, it must be on Amazon, and see the Amazon Basic ones. Hey, this one's $20 cheaper, $40 cheaper.
Pretty much.
Let's get that one. And they were like, what are we supposed to do? If we don't go on Amazon, we can't reach the same amount of people.
Right.
They'll go for a competitor's brand, and if we try to advertise ourselves, it's still going to link back to Amazon. So, like, this is also, and I had this initially in the headlines, but I figured I could just use it as a talking point. Like, Europe seems to be taking a hard stance on big tech.
Yeah.
Which, bravo.
Good. Yeah.
About time.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think people realize tech has become so instrumental in our lives at this point. I mean, even the Amazon thing is a good example of your reality being basically shaped by whatever site you're on. That's not the real world, per se. There's more so code that's giving you this kind of version of the real world. And when we're dealing with companies, I think the thing is, we need, as a society, to figure out how we want or what our relationship is going to be with tech, and to not just kind of stumble into the darkness with that relationship. I mean, after all, we're coming up with stuff like Neuralinks, where they're going to plug this stuff into your head. Shouldn't, at the very least, you have this stuff kind of nailed down in regards to the laws, the legalities, the policies that are going to go forward, and the public's take on that stuff. And yeah, I don't think it's wrong for the public to say, well, let me ask you, is it wrong for Amazon to do that? If Amazon owns the product, they own the device and everything else, is it wrong for Amazon to say, hey, here's our product?
Yes, because they're a monopoly. Same thing with Google being like the go-to search engine. They have a monopoly.
Right.
So therefore, they have to take both practices of a company and a platform.
Right.
Amazon needs to take both practices of a company and a platform.
Basically split the business.
They can't entirely be for their own profit, or they will be hit with antitrust.
Right.
They did that entirely for their own profit.
Of course.
They got hit with antitrust.
Yeah.
Simple as that. I mean, Google has so many subsidiaries within it. They have to take actions as a platform as well as a company.
But don't all companies have an incentive, complete incentive, to do exactly what Amazon and Google are doing here?
Yes, but they also don't have a monopoly on the market.
Well, what do you consider a monopoly? 75%, 80%, or being a literal monopoly where they're the only one that's in the market?
I mean, you can't legitimately ever be the only one. There's always going to have some form of competition. Like Amazon has eBay.
Right.
Which
well, that's what I'm
isn't the
asking
same
you. Like,
thing,
so is Amazon a monopoly in regards to what Amazon does? Because there are other products out there.
Yeah.
Like you said, there's eBay.
I can't give you a hard number if you have 70%, 80%. I don't know. And the same thing with Google. Like there's Bing.
Yeah.
There's Yahoo Search, like whatever.
But Google has like 70% of the market share or something like that.
Right,
some insane amount.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I'd say that constitutes a monopoly. And I don't know what the legal definition of what percentage would be.
Yeah.
I'm not going to pretend that I do. But yes, I'd say Google and Amazon both have monopolies on it.
I think it's every incentive in the world for them to do exactly what they're doing. And that comes up to the public debate because they say, is it okay or is it not?
Then a little bit stickier of a question. Do you think Apple has a monopoly? Because they have a direct competitor.
Yeah.
Microsoft.
Right. Apple has a few direct competitors.
And Samsung.
Google is even
Android.
a competitor of Apple at this point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
I mean,
Google
it's
broken.
like all of those kind of in that tech milieu or something. I don't know. I think it's an interesting thing. I mean, I think Amazon, Google, all of these guys have every incentive in the world to do exactly what they're doing and trying to kind of corner the market in order to get as much profit as possible. And if that means, hey, I'm going to push you to my product that works extremely well, then that's what they're going to do. I mean, Microsoft got hit with this too. If you remember, Bill Gates, when he was trying to get, I think it was like Internet Explorer on everybody's computer and trying to get rid of Firefox as a major competitor associated with it. And if I'm not mistaken, he got hit
with
like the antitrust stuff too. And so, you know, maybe the antitrust needs to be beefed up a little bit in the United States in comparison to Europe, because Europe, I agree with you, they seem to be taking this far more seriously than we are. I mean, honestly, I would even go so far as to say the political parties should be hit with antitrust legislation. I mean, and I know it sounds a little bit different, but you basically have a Democratic and Republican Party, and they function to keep other parties out of the system. The laws that they pass, I mean, even that voting rights bill that they were passing was going to make it that much more difficult for third parties to get involved into the political process. If both of these things are basically corporations, which I would say they are, shouldn't they also get hit with antitrust legislation?
Well, yes, but, you know, we have such big lobbying power for the bigger your company is.
Right.
So that's why I take a stance of difference between capitalism and corporatism. I think that corporations shouldn't have a say in politics, but at the same time, they also shouldn't contribute to campaign funding.
Agreed.
But at the same time, like, they are to such a degree right now that they can influence any legislation that would prevent them from doing that in the future.
1000% agree.
So that's why, like, I think capitalism works, especially for an economy standpoint.
Same thing.
It very quickly can devolve into corporatism, and
it's the difference between a child versus an adult. That's all. I mean, if you're going to, meaning, how do you stop this capitalistic system from getting into the quote-unquote corporatism if you're going to make the...
But you can't,
I don't make a distinction.
You can't let businesses in politics.
How do you stop that?
Well, how do you stop it when it starts? A different conversation than never letting it start.
Okay. I mean, I guess my thing is, I don't know how you stop that. I don't even know how you prevent that from starting.
Well, so the pushback would be, because I think we could both say that we would rather businesses not be in politics.
Yes.
But the pushback is saying, well, then how are you going to make policies around businesses if you have if the business doesn't have real representation?
Right. But see, the representation seems to be easy for me from the business standpoint. I mean, your politicians need cash to get elected. And meaning they have every incentive in the world as to look around to figure out where is the cash located. And so from the standpoint of a business who wants more, let's say, clout politically, again, every incentive in the world for him to maximize his income by getting more clout into political space, and every incentive in the world for the politician to basically get that cash and give him that clout. Meaning, if everybody in this process has an incentive to do what they're doing now, how do you prevent them from doing it? And I guess that's my thing. That's why I say I don't consider a difference between this notion of corporatism and capitalism. One invariably is going to turn into the other to varying degrees. I mean, you could have somewhere like Europe, let's say like in Sweden, where they are far more, it's a capitalistic system. By the same token, they have far more stringent requirements.
Look at China.
Yeah.
They have a capitalistic economy under an authoritarian government.
Ish.
The only way China's been able to climb up as fast as they have been is to take a capitalist economy approach.
In part.
And they did it under an authoritarian rule.
I know, but can you have a capitalistic system in an authoritarian country?
Yeah.
How?
Well, a full system, no. A capitalist-styled economy, yes.
But is it a capitalistic-style economy, or is it just a sector of the economy that was basically...
It is. It's just instead of being overseen by Congress who does legislation, it's overseen by a dictator.
Yeah.
So it's putting a lot of faith in them, but...
I guess my point is, it's not... China would take great qualms with you saying they have a capitalistic country.
Yeah, they would, but that's so far historically been the only proven way to get out of a crumbling economy.
Yeah. Okay, let's do this. We can come back to it. You guys are listening to Fault Lines. Thomas and Pelly. We'll be back with Faren Franzak. Always a great guest. You're going to enjoy her. Back in a moment.
Fault Lines.
By Any Means Necessary is your guide to the movement and efforts shaping the world around us. From mass incarceration
No longer am I interested in or concerned with prison reform. I am interested only in the eradication of prisons.
To the battle between police and water protectors.
It was a pretty punishing disregard for the sanctity of human life, that unleashing water cannons on peaceful, prayerful water protectors.
From efforts to protect the environment.
The climate movement is ready to, with plenty of opposition research and force and strength, along with, the right of both science and morality, to fight them on this.
To the movement for Black Lives.
When I first saw the Michael Brown video, and I saw that it clearly contradicted the narrative put forth by the Ferguson Police Department and by police supporters in general, 3 words came to mind. Color me shocked.
Stay tuned to By Any Means Necessary, 5 days a week here on Radio Sputnik.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined with my co-host, Austin Pelly, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. If you guys just so happen to find yourself in the D.C. area, you can catch us on radio at 105.5 FM and 1390 AM. We're also kicking around in Kansas City at 102.9 FM and 104.7 FM. If you guys are digging what Austin and I are putting down, whatever platform you're consuming this content on, give us a like and share that audio or video. If you want to join in on the conversation, you can do so with a chat, a tweet, and of course, you can reach us by phone at 202-521-1320. Your engagement helps make this show what it is, so definitely don't be shy. So Macron, all of the events that have been taking place over the course of the last several weeks in regarding Ukraine, you've had Russia having all sorts of conversations with the United States, with NATO, with its European, other people who are associated in Europe and the European leaders. And Macron, now that Angela Merkel has stepped down, seems to be trying to take this kind of premier leadership position of Europe. And so Macron is going to meet with Putin, and they're going to have a conversation again, still talking about the issue of Ukraine. Does this mean that France is taking, let's say, Germany's spot as the major country in Europe? And are they going to be able to get anything associated with this done on the issue of Ukraine? To have a conversation about this and other issues that are taking place, we're joined with Faren Franzak. She's current primetime news anchor on RT America. She's been an anchor all across the United States, including South Bend, Indiana, El Paso, Texas, and Austin, Texas. And you can see her every night on RT America on her show Fair and Balance, where she calls out corruption, hypocrisy around the world with her customary witty and sarcastic sense of humor. Faren, welcome to the show. How you doing this morning?
You forgot feisty, Jamarl.
Feisty. My bad. I forget the feisty. I'm going to add feisty in. How you doing this morning? You doing okay?
Not too bad. Jamarl and I this weekend, I think we're doing something that every American completely hates doing, moving.
That's right. You had to move.
You guys have had a stressful weekend.
Yeah, to put it mildly. How did your move go? Are you finished?
Pretty much. I've got like maybe 5 or 6 more boxes, but it's all of the little stuff. You don't realize how much stuff you have as a human until it's like all the miscellaneous stuff, and you're like, throw it in a box, and you got to open it later.
Or even the stuff that you don't realize you need until you need it. It's like you're like, okay, I need one of these things now, and I don't have this thing. Yeah, it's a pain.
And you're like, oh my gosh, I can't find the toilet paper.
Yeah, right. Right. It's like, okay, I need to go to a store immediately. Yeah, that's how it is. It's a move. It's horrendous, but such is life. I wanted to go to the Macron issue first before moving into some of the domestic politics. I thought this was very interesting. And so you had basically members of Russia having all sorts of conversations with the various people, not just in the United States, but also Europe and NATO. And of course, Russia put out their demands. We don't want Ukraine to be a part of NATO. We don't want the old Soviet states basically to be a part of NATO. We don't want whether that's de facto or whether that's literal. And it seems that Macron is trying to take this kind of leadership position now that Angela Merkel has stepped down, and is trying to be this kind of European leader, or this premier European leader. What do you think about this? I mean, it seems that France and some of these other guys have been more skeptical of, let's say, the U.S. position on this, and have been trying to find some level of, some way of coming up with some kind of deal or some kind of agreement to bring down hostility. Why do you think this is? I mean, do you think this is just purely because Europe has a different interest than the United States in regards to this kind of geopolitics stuff? Meaning France, Germany, many of the other European states wanted to be more conciliatory on this note, and yet we're still here, kind of at the precipice of this kind of unraveling issue. What are your thoughts on this? Is this France taking the premiership of Europe?
A little bit, but you're forgetting that Emmanuel Macron is up for re-election.
Mm-hmm.
What better time to start making a name for himself than right before you have to be re-elected? Because he's not doing so hot in the polls. Between Joe Biden, Boris Johnson, Bojo, and Emmanuel Macron, all three are in the danger zone, riding high, and one of them has to make a move. And what better way for Emmanuel to step in there and say, look, I saved us from having World War III in Europe. Look how wonderful I am, French people. Vote for me.
So
I think it's really more about.
Fair enough. Like half of these headlines that I'm seeing are saying Francis Macron flies to meet Putin in risky bid to avert war. So what is so risky about him meeting with Putin, and why is it different than Biden meeting with Putin?
Well, I think it's more risky because you have to remember, I mean, one of the things that I think that's very interesting with France, that the United States really screwed itself over, is you have to remember that little debacle where Australia was set to buy those nuclear submarines.
Right.
France,
I remember that.
The United States swooped in and was like, oops, sorry. And Emmanuel Macron was like, not happy at all.
I remember that.
They were a NATO alliance. I thought we're supposed to, like, know about these deals. But, you know, when you're talking the headlines, it's very interesting because over the weekend, it actually was shown. Bloomberg came out with an apology because they actually put out Russia invades Ukraine, and it was out and as a headline on the website, I think, for a good 30 minutes until they yanked it down.
Really?
To issue an apology. They have this stuff ready in the headlines to go, folks. Like, it's ready to go the minute that, like, one shot's fired, boom. And if you look, I believe it was Friday night or Saturday morning that it happened. And it was making the rounds all on Instagram, Twitter, all of that, of people showing, wow, they're ready for this headline to just click, you know, live and go. And, yeah, they had to issue an apology.
Do you think Macron is going to be successful on this to any measure? I mean, like I said, Europe has different interests than the United States on this stuff. And so it seems that they've been more conciliatory than basically a Blinken or some of the other people that was negotiating on behalf of the United States. What do you think his chances on trying to get some kind of deal here, or let's say arranging Europe to come to some level of agreement with Russia on this issue?
I think he's going to be successful. I mean, he has no choice not to be, you know, and I think that him and Putin will be able to find some common ground. I think that Emmanuel Macron knows, because he has been, you know, for lack of a better word, screwed over by the United States a couple of times here. And, you know, I think at this point he's not going to mind being called a Putin puppet or whatever it is that, you know, they're going to call him, or what anybody, you know, if anybody has the slightest option of, hey, how does Russia feel about this? You're immediately a Putin puppet.
Right.
So I think, you know, once he gets past that headline, I think he'll actually have a pretty good, productive meeting with Putin, and just knowing that they're asking for one thing: just hold the line when it comes to NATO. Please don't expand eastward. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yep. But I will say too, I think when you look at the list of how many countries are in NATO and how many of their troops are being used, the United States is the #1 funder of NATO, as Donald Trump had a very big problem with NATO, calling it useless, that it was basically run by the United States. But France and the UK were up there as far as how much military reserves they had, all that. So I think Macron maybe, you know, might say, hey, Putin's got a point here. Why is it working? You know, because, again, our NATO ally was the United States, and they just screwed us out of a deal with Australia. Not looking good for the United States.
Yeah. And Faren, do you think that whether it be this conversation, the next, or what have you in the future, that France is uniquely in this position to essentially broker the peace between Russia and NATO? Because, you know, America tried to spearhead that, and we failed miserably. And now Bojo's taking a hard line stance that, like, oh, we're war hungry, Russia's going down, and Germany's kind of been neutral throughout this, although they've sent quite a few helmets. They've been doing their part in the helmet department. So, is France kind of uniquely set up to, if it's going to be peace, France is going to be the broker?
I definitely think so. Because, like you said, with Germany, with their new chancellor, they're still trying to get their footing on where do we stand. Even their own chancellor being like, where do I fit in all of this? Another big player you have too is Hungary. Mm-hmm. Hungary is out there like, like we're not dealing with this, and you're seeing a lot of other NATO allies come forward. But yeah, I definitely think it could possibly be France just because it's, a bigger power and has more pull than a country like Hungary. But it's definitely going to be interesting. But like I said, I think that when it comes out that the talks went well, I think you're going to see the State Department run circles around itself, possibly even more so than it did over last week with good old Ned Price.
Yes.
I think he got some training over the weekend.
Yes. Yeah. And apparently Psaki also, Psaki ran into something similar apparently where didn't want to answer. Ned Price, we ran this clip, I think it was on Friday, where Ned Price was basically just asked, okay, where's your evidence for it? And loses it, has a complete meltdown on that issue. And apparently Psaki was hit with a question like that also and didn't necessarily handle it all that well. Do you think that this meaning...
what happened with Psaki was, because I reported it we broke it on my show last week, about where Psaki was asked on Air Force One after, Biden's little presser about the drones, or what they thought was probably a drone strike, and then it was this suicide vest blew up. It was a reporter from NPR that actually said, hey, what is the proof about this being a suicide vest? And Psaki basically was like, what, you don't believe us? You're going to believe ISIS over us? And she,
wow.
Well, we don't have a great record about caring about civilians. Just saying, and that's where you even see Ned Price. The one thing that I love about Ned Price, just real quick, worked for the CIA, he says he worked under a Democrat and a Republican president, but it was Donald Trump where he realized, I just morally can't work for a president like this. We go to the State Department and lies. Like, what? The audacity with some of the people here in D.C. is shocking.
It's shocking on how bad they were. Why didn't the idea that you're just asking for evidence and for Ned Price to basically melt down like that? He even went so far as to say, okay, well, you can just take the Russia perspective on it. It's like, dude, only thing I'm asking you for is evidence. You're trying to say that Russia is planning a false flag attack in Ukraine. Okay, fair enough. Why are you thinking that? And Ned Price didn't have an answer for that. And not just didn't have an answer for it, basically went after the journalists for basically even asking him for evidence on it. And, the fact that Psaki is willing to do something similar for this, what is it? Have they just gotten so accustomed to not being hit with questions or to not having kind of a skeptical press that they basically are shocked when one of them are being questioning or are being a little bit aggressive in trying to get information from them? And why now? I guess that's two questions, but I hope you understand what I'm getting at here. Why all of a sudden are the media asking these legitimately good questions? And why, at this particular moment, is the Biden administration basically not seeming to have answers for this stuff? What changed?
And it's interesting because Ned Price used like my mom's defense when I was growing up because I said so.
Right.
Like, I heard that when I was 15. Mom, why do I have to do that? Because I said so. That's the proof, Ned Price. And the reason why I think now to be fair, Matt Lee, who was the AP diplomacy reporter, he has been a hawk on the State Department. He questioned a lot of the State Department back in 2014 over the whole Crimea incident, and was then Jen Psaki, a young Jen Psaki, who was the press reporter the press secretary for the State Department then. So Matt Lee has always been tough. But when you have like this new NPR reporter coming forward, one of the things that a lot of people pointed out in the memes underneath all of these videos was Colin Powell, and how Colin Powell told us and showed us a little vial of these are the weapons of mass destruction. Here's the proof. Here's this. And it was all a lie. And so the American people, I think, are waking up, including some of the media, because you have the rise of like a Joe Rogan who's asking these questions as well and calling out the media for not asking questions like this. And I think it's the time and time again of, hey, say what we say when we say it. Here, reporters, here's what's coming out of the State Department now to go repeat it. You know, Dick Cheney used to do this, where he would, like, tell the New York Times, like, oh, yeah, we have proof. Like, here it is. We have this. It's going to happen. The New York Times would report it. And then Dick Cheney would be like, oh, well, see, look, the New York Times is reporting it. It was like this circular, like, trying to, like, put this spin out there, and it doesn't work anymore. People have caught on to the game. And again, we're talking about a war here. The United States is beating a war drum, along with Britain, very much the same way with Iraq and Afghanistan. People are done with war. Now, over the weekend, I was talking to a mother whose son was just shipped off to Ukraine, and she said, here I was so worried about my son being sent to Afghanistan, and then we pull out, and I'm like, okay, I can breathe a sigh of relief. Now my son has to go to Europe? Why? And it's very, very scary at a time like this for many people in the military families, because it's like, what? They're going to go get their arms and legs blown off because we need a war in Europe now? It's all a racket. It's all to make money, and it's sad, just the way that this is all happening. But again, so you're back to your point, though. Sorry for my little media rant, but it's happening now because people have woken up, and they remember a guy like Colin Powell saying all this stuff back in the day, and they don't want it. They don't want a war. Americans want a breather, but clearly the military-industrial complex, after 20 years of war in Afghanistan, clearly needs to keep paying its bills somehow. So let's go mess with Russia.
Faren, if we can switch now to Joe Rogan. I know you briefly mentioned him, and over the weekend it came out, this compilation of him saying the N-word. One question that I want to focus on that we haven't really gotten to yet is, I mean, initially he was in controversy for, let's say, distasteful takes on the vaccines. And regarding the guests that he had on, and Neil Young kind of made a stint, and then Joni Mitchell followed, and maybe some other artists were thinking about it. But now it quickly has shifted to, racial slurs, he's a racist. Before, it was a question of free speech on a platform, because while it was a minority view of the take on vaccines, it's still a view, therefore it should have some spot to either hang itself with its own ideology, or it should have some platform to be able to express that, which was the Joe Rogan experience. He was unapologetically Joe Rogan. So I'm curious, after this, is this a bid to shift it into what is consistently the best way to cancel someone? To shift the conversation from free speech censorship into you're a racist?
You know, it's interesting because I've watched Joe Rogan for a long time now, and I know exactly what bits they were talking about. Was it tasteful for him to use the word? Absolutely not. And that's, again, what he had apologized for. However, what he does say is, you know, and mind you, he wasn't dropping the N-word like he was not caring about saying it or what have you. He was talking about it in the context, for example, one of them he was talking with, I believe it was Tom Segura, about Richard Pryor and how Richard Pryor would drop the N-word. It was actually even the title of one of his albums. And they were talking about it in the context of, hey, you know, and then comparing it to Bill Cosby, where Bill Cosby was saying, don't say the N-word to each other. Don't call each other that.
Right.
So, again, very tasteful for him to drop the word, but in the context of what he was using it, he was talking about it being used. What this is, though, is first they tried to cancel him for false facts. Now they're trying to cancel him to be a racist. What's going to be next? And I think, you know, comedian Andrew Schultz put it perfectly. What's next? Is it going to be transphobic, homophobic, you know, a Putin puppet? Like, what is his next thing going to be that you're going to try to cancel him on? And the big part of that is that this isn't about canceling Joe Rogan. This isn't about trying to take him down. This is about they have lost their powerful voice to someone who just asks basic questions. And the reason he has all these people listening is because they're easy questions. Just like, again, Matt Lee, Ned Price, what is the proof that you have that Russia's making a propaganda video? Well, I just told you. That is not evidence. It's a simple question, simple answer. They can't answer these questions And that's why a lot of people are uniting together around Joe Rogan, because he asks these questions.
Yeah.
And where do you see Spotify going with this? Because I know there are questions of, at least when we first heard the headline and broke it, we were saying how, oh, there's no way Spotify is going to relinquish their $100 million deal for the most popular podcast in the world for Neil Young getting a little hurt. So that's how it first started. And now we had Daniel Ek, the CEO, come out and issue a letter to his employees saying like, hey, it's hurtful. I'm so sorry if anyone is. But at the same time, we are not a censorship platform. We're not going to censor him and we're going to let him do his thing. But at the same time, they've removed 113 of Rogan's episodes. 70 of them come after this N-word compilation, saying that they needed to get rid of some of those. And while, yes, Rogan has thousands of episodes, 113 is not that many overall. That's 113 episodes of censorship, right? So, like, which stance is Spotify trying to appease both parties? Like, what do you see coming out of that front?
I mean, either way, Spotify is going to lose because, yeah, it's either going to be censorship or it's going to be that they're for Joe Rogan. The part that I just don't understand with people, and I think this is where the real overarching umbrella theme here is with people. Why do you get to decide what I get to listen to? If you don't like Joe Rogan, then just don't listen to him. Mm-hmm. Real easy. There's a bunch of people. There's what? I don't know how many people in the United States, but 12 million choose to listen to him. What about the other 39 million that aren't? You know, they had no qualms or quarrels with him before all of this happened. You know, and that's the other thing, too, is it's also another distraction, Austin. It's another distraction of, hey, we have rising inflation, we have all these tensions, we have homeless encampments popping up every single day because people are getting evicted, people still can't pay their bills. You know, it's one of these things where pay no attention to the domestic issues. Let's go start a war over here and then go take on Joe Rogan because, God forbid, you have a different thought.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. Rogan is a pretty decent show. And, yeah, I agree with you. I agree with your take on it. It's deplorable that, you know, the thing was made. But most of that stuff was in context in the way that he was trying to explain it. And the clip that they were showing it was entirely out of context. I mean, it seems like the entire point of this was basically a hit video to kind of pile on of trying to get rid of Rogan. One of the other points I wanted to hit also was Avenatti, Michael Avenatti. Guilty, convicted. Apparently twice convicted Avenatti. I want to play this clip because people may forget, but liberals used to love this guy. I'm going to ask the producers, the engineer, to pull the clip up. But Avenatti was basically recently convicted. It was wire fraud. He apparently tried to steal $300,000 from Stormy Daniels, a previous porn star, and he was busted for it. Let's play the clip.
He's out there saving the country.
You know what? He's a rock star, I think. Michael Avenatti's a beast.
You're like the Holy Spirit. You are all places at all times.
Sitting beside me right now, I'm not going to let you cheat. You have to guess. And hint, his name is Michael Avenatti.
Here's something else. Michael Avenatti, I'd like to meet you sometime over at dinner.
You got lucky tonight. We're back with attorney Michael Avenatti. He is a main player.
Looking ahead to 2020, one reason why I'm taking you seriously as a contender is because of your presence on cable news.
We've done this. It's great. The reason that he's a contender was because of his presence on cable news. Also, I love the one who says the Holy Spirit, Michael Avenatti, convict, Michael Avenatti at this point. Liberals love this guy. How embarrassing is that? What are your thoughts?
Well, and if you listen there, I mean, if you listen to all those, I mean, clearly it's all CNN, but like,
MSNBC also. Both. Like Chris Matthews, for example, Lawrence O'Donnell. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and it's like, then you have Chris Cuomo, and it's like, oh, how the mighty have fallen.
Yeah.
All these people just loved him just because he was going after Trump. That's it. The guy is a sleazebag, okay? Like, the guy, you know, and no offense, like, so is Stormy Daniels. Like, it's kind of funny how they both were using each other, and at the end, like, she ends up suing him. I mean, it's kind of like one of the best plays you could write ever, you know? Porn star and sleazebag lawyer, you know, joined together to try to take Trump down. Now they're taking each other down.
I think the saddest part about that is all of those liberals were basically backing him entirely because he was going against Trump. Like, if you think about the Democratic Party, This is supposed to be a political institution. They're supposed to care about policy and, doing what's best for the American public, at the very least, written down on paper anyway. And all of that went out the window. It's like all of that went out the window in favor of, hey, that guy's a pit bull. That guy's not scared of Trump. That's what we need in this particular moment. We need Avenatti. Avenatti is our guy. He's the Holy Spirit. He's the guy that's going to beat Trump. And missing the point about issues of policy, missing the point about issues of, I don't know, ensuring people can have homes or dealing with COVID. And I know at the time COVID wasn't necessarily running gangbusters, but it's amazing to me. And I would even go so far as to say that this is kind of the epitome of their problems. Like with the January 6th convention, for example, instead of having an honest conversation about, okay, what actually happened on January 6th? What actually happened in regards to Trump trying to take the election? Well, that's not what it ended up becoming. It became this thing that throws in information every so often about Trump, almost in order to keep Trump in the main stream media light. It's almost as if they can't craft a policy or a party without having some device of Trump being there that they can kind of organize around. And that's kind of why I go and say this is kind of the worst aspect of that party, or the epitome of everything that's wrong with the party. It seems that they have been deranged by Trump to such a degree that this notion of policy and pushing for stuff short of Trump, just not part of the mix anymore. What are your thoughts on this? I mean, they wanted this guy to run for office under the banner of a Democrat.
Yeah, thank God he didn't. But like you're talking about, like the January 6th insurrection. I mean, you're seeing like the media, they also like to devise and rewrite what happened. Like, for example, those Canadian truckers up there, you have Justin Trudeau now calling it an insurrection. It's like,
wow.
Folks actually know what an insurrection is, what it looks like. It's not a pretty thing. I'll give you a hint, though. An insurrection isn't 20,000 truckers, hey, stop giving us a COVID mandate. That's not what an insurrection is. And you have the media constantly trying to tell you exactly how you should think and how this looks. And, and it's like with Avenatti, them trying to, it's like you could put lipstick on a pig. It's still a pig.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people just saw him and he went out there too, if you remember, just with his arrogance, like, oh yeah, I'm going to take Trump down. Well, it kind of looks like you went down first, buddy.
Multiple times. Multiple times,
yes.
Yeah, that's greatly unfortunate. So what do you think goes on with this? I mean, this is basically going into the primary or the midterms at this point. And look, I'm at a loss for where they go. I mean, yes, you have the Ukraine thing, and yes, you have these kind of political grandstanding, and that's not just in the United States. Like you said, Boris, Macron, and Biden, all of them are in this kind of weird same boat with this particular issue. So how do you think this basically turns out? Avenatti is going to be out. Biden is going to have to run on his own. Democrats are going to have to run on their own merits. Are we just looking at a Republican wipeout here?
Definitely, but here's the one thing. And Austin, this is where you have to hold your side's feet to the fire.
Uh-oh.
You have these little insiders of Republicans talking about in the midterms, hey, all we got to do is show up. They hate the Democrats so bad. And you're hearing the inside talk of, no, we don't need to do anything. We don't need to pass anything. We just need to take over the House and we'll be fine. And mind you, Republicans haven't been able to take over the House in a long time. I believe it's like back to the 60s or 70s. Don't quote me, but a long, long time since they've had power. But here you have some of them, hey, no, just take it back and let's not change anything. We don't need to vote or do policy. And it's like, no, you need to keep doing that. That's why you're here. That's why we're electing you. And so when you hear that and you hear and you get a little taste of how the sausage is made, it's like, oh, none of you guys really do anything. That's why, for example, you're seeing like this whole movement, for those that haven't been following, of young congressmen or like the congressional staffers. They want to unionize because they're like, we don't get paid anything and we're doing all the work for them. We need to start getting equal pay. And it's going to be interesting when you have congressional staffers unionizing. How's that going to go, Nancy Pelosi? How's that? You know, it's going to be interesting.
Yeah, I think the first step, I've always been like, yes, I do think that Republicans are going to take the House at the midterms. I think that we're gonna get it, but I've been very apropos to be like, well, let's see what we do about it, because then we still got, as I've been saying, I think Biden Biden might be so good at not getting stuff done, he's going to take out his veto stamp like crazy. So he could just kibosh everything. And then I just hope that the right is smart enough to say, hey, you know, all these things that have been making the Democrats implode on themselves, let's not follow that same outline that they just did. And that way we can actually keep our chairs. So we'll see. I'm a little bit apprehensive to make any super big predictions. I hope that they can just say, hey, you know what, whatever they did, let's do the opposite. To actually get some stuff done and stoke the fire.
But it's like what I say all the time. The reason they don't get stuff done is because if you were to solve problems, people stop getting paid when you solve problems. Rather, it's just like our healthcare system. They're not paying for you to get healthy. They're paying for you to stay sick because they make money when you keep getting sick. That's why you have high obesity rates. That's why you have people that are addicted to soda and pop, or wherever you are in the country listening, whatever you call it, you know, but like in Chicago, we call it pop. But, you know, it's one of these things where, yeah, people don't make money when problems get solved. And, again, the Republicans saying the quiet part out loud, or this little inside group saying, no, we don't have to, like, we just got to take over the House and not do anything. And you know what? That's when you get a figure like Donald Trump, where you get the right and the left both not doing anything, and it's the forgotten people that are not being heard, and they're literally creating the next Trump, whether that's going to be in a Ron DeSantis or, you know, who knows, but it's not looking good. So Republicans, you're right, they better do something, or they will implode just as bad as the Democrats too, and it'll be the pot calling the kettle black.
Yeah, I just don't know what that would be. I mean, that's kind of the rub. It seems that both parties have gotten into their mind that they don't really need to get anything done. That invariably, the audience. It's something Nancy Pelosi said, where she's kind of made this point about how, oh, those people will come back. Meaning, yeah, people will go to Trump right now, but eventually they'll get sick of Trump and they'll come back to us. And I think that's kind of the philosophy that both parties have at this point. That even if they leave you for one term, they'll come back in another term because they have nowhere else to basically go. It's basically a captive audience. And I'll be honest, I don't necessarily know how to get out of that situation or how to extricate the country out of that. And maybe there is no way to extricate it out of it, short of just kind of hitting some kind of major crisis where the public just wants fundamentally something different. Faren, thank you for this. I always appreciate you joining us on the show. The voice.
Having me.
Absolutely. The voice that you guys were listening to is Faren Franzak. She's current primetime news anchor for RT America. She's worked all across the United States, in South Bend, Indiana, El Paso, Texas, Austin, Texas, and Grand Rapids, Michigan. You can catch her every night on RT America, 7 to 8 p.m. Eastern on Fair and Balance, where she calls out corruption and hypocrisy around the world with her customary witty, sarcastic, and feisty sense of humor. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Pelly. We'll be taking your phone calls. The number is 202-521-1320. Back in a moment.
Lines.
In a media landscape filled with so-called journalists acting as stenographers for their billionaire bosses, there is a desperate need for news, analysis, and perspectives that buck the status quo and get to the heart of how domestic and international events impact you and me, as well as showing how we can get involved in the struggle to change that status quo. Check out By Any Means Necessary on Radio Sputnik, Monday through Friday from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern, to hear the stories and voices that mainstream media refuses to tell you. And join us as we connect the political, social, and economic movements shaping the world around us. That's By Any Means Necessary, Monday through Friday at 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern, right here on Radio Sputnik.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined with my co-host, Austin Pelly, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C., and we are accepting your phone calls. The number is 202-521-1320, and we have Tarif. Tarif, what's going on, my man? How you doing this morning?
Thank you for taking my call. I have 4 comments for Joe Rogan. Before I say it, free joining signs, and they raising money like hell on it with Ethereum, with that new Mary Pack thing that's supposed to be coming out today, dealing with that art thing. Here I go. This is what Joe Rogan have to do. He have to go on an offensive. 4 programs he got to stick to. and do them as quick as possible. That's if somebody listen to me and they give it straight to them. First thing, bring up the assassination of MLK. What Dick Gregory and some other people discovered, where you had a gunman supposedly was on the first floor that was tied to the mob, and a military unit that was in Memphis at the time, and the guy that was helping Ray, I forgot his name, Ray something, had ties to the CIA, FBI, and also was at Dealey Plaza when Kennedy was assassinated. All these coincidences around MLK, Martin Luther King, need to be brought up on this show, and the files need to be released. When the FBI was following MLK. My second comment is dealing with what happened to the MOVE organization back in '84, and why at the time the mayor didn't be brought up on charges, and the police chief and the fire chief, because they let the apartment complex burn with people in there after they dropped a bomb on people. They need to investigate that. And you will also find out the mayor was a Democrat with ties to the DNC. It's amazing why, certain people information is brought up, but not everybody, okay? Look into that for 4 hours. You'd be amazing what other things will come out from that. But third comment is to look, I'm going to have to say this again, MKUltra. It existed. It was, people was experimenting on, places like Tulane University, some other universities around the country, mental institutions, prisons as well, like Angola, the prison inmate population, the people that was mentally...
Sharif, real quick. Real quick. I understand that Rogan has to push back and he needs to go on the offensive. Okay, fair enough. But at the point where he's come out and apologized for, look, the video was ghastly. Call it what it is, right? Even though I get that they're using this to try to take him off the air and trying to deplatform and everything else. And no, clearly, I don't think they should be able to do that. And in the way that Rogan kind of made it, they made this video taking all of that stuff out of context. But by the same token, I agree with him coming out and apologizing and giving this kind of heartfelt apology. How does bringing up the Martin Luther King thing, help him to deal with the fallout from him basically using the N-word in that kind of cut video?
No, I'm gonna get to it. I gotta finish what I'm saying. Bring out the MKUltra thing, all right? With the electrodes been placed in people's heads, experimented on with acid and all types of things. The largest portion of people that was experimented on was African American, then poor white people out like the Appalachian Mountains. My fourth comment is dealing with he need to invite Whitney Webb on where she can talk about Palantir, what they had in New Orleans in 2015-16. Palantir Pegasus, Promise Software with the Maxwell family that would have ties to the intelligence community. Now, you were saying, does this excuse him what he was saying? No, it does not excuse what he was saying. I don't agree with it, but at the same time, Jamarl, it was done in context. Just like when Biden in the 70s said the N-word when he was describing something, and he was a senator, right? Just like you have in these movies, not just Quentin Tarantino movies, like with Denzel, because he used the N-word a lot in those movies, but you have countless other movies.
Sharif, we're going to have to close this one. But look, I get your point, and I didn't take issue. Look, clearly I didn't take issue with the video. I was defending Rogan in this. I'm just saying I don't see how one affects the other. That's all. We have one more call. 30 seconds.
It seems like they're calling back for the 9:45. We had a couple in there, so if you want to talk, please, we'd love to hear you. 9:45, we're going to have another segment. But for now, we're going to close it to head into the next hour. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Pelly. Stick around for the next 60 minutes of the show. Be right back after the break.
listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Fault lines.
Live from the divided states of America, fixated between the ever-expanding rift on our collective ideology. I'm your political analyst fighting for the right, Austin Pelly.
And in the left corner, I'm your indefatigable, your ever-vigilant, your last man on the wall, your political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
That means that you are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Pelly. Good conversation so far, and we got 60 more minutes to hit some others. We're going to be talking about this freedom convoy to come and what it could mean for the future and what it could mean for us Americans as we head into March. A little teasy for that, but for now, let's hit our headlines and COVID news. Yesterday in the United States, there were 295,922 new COVID cases reported, along with 2,565 deaths. Over the past week, there have been an average of about 298,641 cases per day, a decrease of 57% from the average 2 weeks ago. 64% of the total American public has been fully vaccinated, and 75% of residents have received at least one dose. As of this morning, the coronavirus has infected 76,419,014 people across the United States and killed 901,405 people. In national news, the White House this morning released a highly anticipated report from its labor task force that includes nearly 70 recommendations. Because, we're very good at sending recommendations. It's like something that someone said always stuck with me. It's like the Geneva suggestions, recommendations on how the government can help workers how the government, can help workers join labor unions and bargain collectively. These include the government offering greater access to the federal workforce for unions seeking to build membership and pushing agencies such as the National Labor Relations Board and the Federal Labor Relations Authority to work closely together to facilitate worker organizations. The 43-page report also pushes the Labor Department to ensure workers who allege retaliation when engaged in organizing receive full protection and prevent the misclassification of workers as independent contractors, a long-running battle with so-called gig economy workers. Attorney turned criminal Michael Avenatti was convicted Friday of swiping nearly $300,000 in book advance money from his then client Stormy Daniels. The now twice convicted felon and one-time rising star now faces a maximum of 22 years in prison for his conviction on wire fraud and aggravated identity theft charges. His conviction marks another black eye for the already tarnished attorney, who rose to national fame during the Trump administration as a vocal foe of the president while he was representing Daniels. He even flouted returning for president against Trump in 2020, as he was reportedly dubbed the savior of the republic. Avenatti is scheduled to be sentenced on May 24th. In international news, Ottawa Mayor Jim Watson on Sunday declared a state of emergency to help deal with an unprecedented 10-day occupation by protesting truckers that has shut down much of the core of the Canadian capital. Watson, who complained earlier in the day that the demonstrators outnumbered police and controlled the situation, did not give details of what measures he might impose. Amid residents' fury at the lack of official response, Ottawa police relocated some protesters and put up fresh barricades on Sunday, saying they are, quote, collecting financial digital vehicle registrations and other evidence that will be used in criminal prosecutions, end quote. The Freedom Convoy began as a movement against a Canadian vaccine requirement for cross-border truckers, but has turned into a rallying point against public health measures in Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's government. International efforts to defuse the standoff over Ukraine intensified this morning, with French President Emmanuel Macron sent to hold talks in Moscow and German Chancellor Olaf Scholz in Washington to coordinate policies as fear of a Russian invasion mounts. The concentration of an estimated 100,000 troops of Russia near Ukraine has fueled Western worries that it heralds a possible offensive. White House National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan warned Sunday that Russia could invade Ukraine any day, triggering a conflict that would come at an enormous human cost. Russia has denied any plans to attack its neighbor, but is urging the U.S. and its allies to bar Ukraine and other ex-Soviet nations from joining NATO, halt weapons deployments there, and roll back NATO forces from Eastern Europe. Washington and NATO have rejected those demands. Indirect talks between the U.S. and Iran will begin on Tuesday, tomorrow, in Vienna in an effort to revive their nuclear deal of 2015. The European Union will oversee and coordinate the talks. Envoys have headed to their home countries 10 days ago in preparation for these discussions. Activists from the group Last Generation staged a protest this morning, gluing their bodies to Germany's main motorway, causing traffic jams and backups for the rush hour traffic. They are demanding a law against food waste and cuts in greenhouse gas emissions from agriculture. They previously placed food that had been discarded on the A100 motorway in another form of protest. In tech news, Spotify CEO Daniel Ek told staffers Sunday that the company will not be canceling Joe Rogan after a clip of the podcaster using the N-word went viral. Ek explained his position on Rogan in a lengthy letter to employees that criticized Rogan's comments but fell short of taking action against the controversial host. Rogan, 54, dropped the N-word almost 24 times while hosting his wildly popular podcast, The Joe Rogan Experience, according to newly unearthed clips. The podcaster called the viral compilation, quote, the most regretful and shameful thing I've ever had to talk about publicly, end quote, on Friday, saying the video was a collage of out-of-text snippets from 12 years of conversations. Swedish company PriceRunner is suing Google for 2.1 billion euro. That's $2.4 billion after a European court ruled Google violated antitrust laws. The controversy stems after the court ruled Google guilty of favoring its own products and services over rivals. It was given a fine of $2.8 billion. Google has launched 2 appeals into the initial court decision. PriceRunner, though, believes that this is an ongoing issue for every day they are out of trial and expects their final amount to be much more than the $2.4 billion they are seeking currently. And in holiday news, today is National Periodic Table Day, Rose Day, and National Sickie Day, which is the first month of February, when most workers are likely to call in sick.
Really?
Interesting. I have a theory for that. Let's close that here, then I'll come right back to it. Those are your headlines. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Pelly. Okay.
Sickie Day.
So National Sickie Day.
Uh-huh.
The first Monday of February.
Okay.
Which means we just came from January.
Right.
What is the number one New Year's resolution for people?
Weight loss.
Got to get back in the gym.
Right.
Along with that, especially coming after a huge holiday surge, what goes along with that is there's a huge uptick in dry January. So.
Oh, you mean alcohol?
Yes.
Okay.
So this is the first Monday in February. Mm-hmm. We just had the first weekend in February.
Right.
I'm thinking people finally broke the dry January.
They got so wasted over the weekend, they just couldn't make it in on Monday, so they had to call in sick.
Exactly. That's my hypothesis.
So your hypothesis is basically people try for January. Like they come in with a full head of steam. They're like, I'm going to change my diet. I'm going to change my weight. I'm going to do all this good stuff. And then by the time they hit February, reality is sinking in. And they just break down. They just lose it. They go to a bar.
I mean,
they get wasted.
Drinking doesn't really mean a breakdown.
I mean, if they were trying so hard to do good, and then by the end of the month, they fail miserably.
No, it could just be a celebratory drink. Like, hey, I made it through dry January. Now let's get wasted on a Friday.
I know, but they're so wasted. Right there on a Sunday. They're so wasted that they can't get up the next day to go to work. I'm saying that's a breakdown.
I think that this is funny because the Super Bowl's next weekend. I would feel like, and that's a Sunday night.
I would feel that would be the time where people would be calling in.
Right.
Yeah.
I've considered it. I know our boss is listening. By no means am I going to. And I know that I absolutely have to show up, rain or shine.
Especially now after saying that.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think that the Monday after Super Bowl should be a national holiday.
Yeah. Why?
Because it's the most watched event. By literally 1/3 of the American public are tuning in.
Is that many people?
Yeah.
Wow.
Over
100 million
Over 100 million people.
Yeah.
Are tuning in to watch the football game, and it's on Sunday night. It ends at like 11.
Right.
We have to be in bed at like 9:30, man. We have to get up early every day. Just make the Monday a federal holiday.
Just make it a holiday.
Or at the very least, make it a half-day work day. Everyone come in after lunch.
Entirely
at noon.
Because of football.
Yeah.
Okay. Just making sure. I just want to nail that down. But the reason is football.
Well, this is the major sporting event basically, for the U.S.
You know what?
When you have
it's like a national holiday.
When you have like the FIFA Cup or the World Premiere in European countries, those countries shut down if their country's playing in it.
Right.
This is the event for Americans.
Right. But that's not
shut down.
I mean, but that's an international event, though. When you're talking about like FIFA and all those, you talk about those countries. All of this is just specific in the United States, meaning it's always going to be us because it's American football. I would say this, though. I agree with you in a sense if you say this is a national holiday. You could say that there's so many people that watch this, then this is basically a national pastime. It's a national event. And because it's a national event, we should take the day. Something like that. That's the best way I could go with it. But from the standpoint of, it's football. I don't even watch it. So it's like, I don't know how to feel whatever. I used to. Somewhere along the way, I fell out of it.
Man, there would be a spread. We would have a kitchen table.
Yeah.
First off, there's 9 people in my family.
Well, don't get me wrong. I still enjoy it, though. Meaning I still like going to parties and stuff, like even soccer. When I was abroad, we'd sit there and watch soccer games and drink and smoke and everything else while you're just basically watching it. It becomes a camaraderie thing, less about the game itself. So
we had a table that could fit 10 because there's 9 people in my family.
Yeah.
So we had a table that could fit 10, and we would make so much food that you couldn't sit at the table. It was all just plates of everything. And it was like one of the best experiences because my mom, who's like fairly health conscious, to the point where if we were like, hey, can we like have a sweet this 1 weekday or something, once a week or something, she'd go and buy like the organic lollipops. She'd get the off-brand organic cereal and things like that that had like low sugar and all that.
See, we'll make a family day out of it.
All of that out the window of the Super Bowl. We eat chili, pigs in blanket, root beer floats. Like, it was just fond memories.
She went all out.
Yeah. She would cook for like the whole day.
Did she still do it?
Now that all our kids are out of the house,
less so.
No.
Yeah.
My dad is like, whenever possible, like, hey, you sure you don't want to cook? You sure? And they'll end up doing like a couple things. Like, she's got a really good Swedish meatball recipe. So she'll like do those. But yeah, it's been less and less food when there was 9-10 people at the house.
Yeah, few and far between at this point.
A lot of food. This time, not so much.
Yeah.
So,
what are you doing this year for it? Are you inviting friends over and just having a?
So I was considering it, but now that I'm at a 750 square foot apartment with me and my roommate, instead of the 5-story house that I just moved from.
Right.
No,
not so much.
My Frisbee team, we were talking yesterday. I was like, hey, by the way, yesterday, you'd be lucky to find today. Last time you can pretty much buy wings in the store. So if you're trying to get raw chicken wings, buy them. Go now. What are you doing listening to us? No, just kidding. Stick around for 48 more minutes.
Yeah.
Then go.
Yeah, don't tell people to leave.
Buy those chicken wings.
What are you doing?
Throw them in your freezer because you're not going to find them for the next few days. You'd be lucky to find them now.
Yeah.
So I told them all, like, hey, go get your chicken wings. They were like, what? I was like, it's the Super Bowl.
Super Bowl.
Like, oh, I wasn't really planning on doing too much for it. I was like, and then one of our guys was like, do we want to do something? And everyone looked at each other. We're like,
y'all should do something for the Super Bowl. You guys are in what? What is it called? National Frisbee or not National Frisbee? Ultimate
Frisbee.
Yeah.
Empty plate, as Andre says. Chase after the empty plate.
Go for it. Y'all should do something.
Well, we are, and it's just going to be funny now that like now we're going to do something. Everyone's going to bring like one dish over. It's going to be great, and I'm going to watch my entire team get wasted.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I have to be up at 5:30.
Yeah.
One beer and I'm gone. Cool.
Well, you can just be the sensible driver for the day, and
Oh, I'm not DDing them.
Oh, you're just there.
Yeah, they can take care of themselves. Because if I got a DD and I'm driving to various locations, that pushes my bedtime even later, which
doesn't help.
Yeah.
Let's do this. Let's take a break. You guys are listening to Fault Lines, Thomas and Pelly. We're going to be back in a moment. We're going to have this kind of conversation about the convoy, the Freedom Convoy, as they call it, Freedom Convoy, that's taking place in Canada. Back in a moment.
Fault Lines. We are talking
24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
You are listening.
We give you the most essential out of the endless information space.
Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
What do we want?
News, politics, and culture.
When do we want it?
Wait, we weren't finished. News, politics, and culture without the red and blue spin.
Okay, so now when do you want it?
Daily from noon to 2 p.m. Eastern Time.
Okay, satisfied now?
Never. Tune in to Political Misfits on 105.5 FM in Washington, D.C. and on 102.9 and 104.7 FM in Kansas City, Missouri. Daily for our analytical fix. No surrender.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined with my co-host, Austin Pelly, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. If you guys happen to find yourself in the D.C. area, you can catch us on radio at 105.5 FM and 1390 AM. We're also kicking around in Kansas City at 102.9 FM and 104.7 FM. If you guys are digging what Austin and I are putting down whatever platform you're consuming this content on, give us a like and share that audio or video. If you want to join in on the conversation, you can do so with a chat, a tweet, and of course, you can reach us by phone at 202-521-1320. Your engagement helps make this show what it is, so definitely don't be shy. So as we've been having a conversation this morning about the convoy, the Freedom Convoy that's taking place in Ottawa, Justin Trudeau, of course, came down with COVID, maybe not. Yeah, probably, or coincidentally so at the very least. And at this point, Ottawa is calling a state of emergency because of the number of people that are there. It is basically shutting the city down. To have a conversation about the Freedom Convoy, we're joined with Lincoln Jay. Lincoln Jay is a Canadian video journalist and independent outlet, Rebel News. He joined Rebel News as a videographer in August 2020. While specializing in video editing and camera work, Lincoln has expanded into reporting and presenting his own stories. You can follow him on Twitter at LincolnMJ. Lincoln, how you doing today? Doing okay this morning?
Yes, thanks so much for having me on. How are you guys?
So far, so good. Better that you are with us. And I appreciate you coming to discuss this with us. I mean, the convoy has gotten a huge amount of publicity, even in the United States. And there's some talk about repeating or doing something similar to it in the United States in order to kind of draw attention around the COVID thing.
Yes, but where I want to start is something that actually broke on Friday. We never actually had the chance to talk about it, and I think it sets up the whole conversation because all of this has to be taken into account. When you're a trucker, when you're over there, when you're out there protesting, it takes time, it takes money, especially in the Canadian cold. You need lodging, you need food, you need all that, and all that comes at a price. How were they going to afford this? Well, they got crowdsourced. They put up a GoFundMe. They raised over $10 million at a rate of about $1 million a day.
Wow.
Where is that money now? Because they're not getting access to it. So what's going on with that GoFundMe and the government freezing that? And what has GoFundMe said about not releasing that money?
Well, basically, as you hinted, GoFundMe has seized the money. So with, I guess, from pressure from which I'm assuming the federal government, they've decided that the protest was, I guess, unlawful, unjust, and that the money was not going to be used for that. So basically they had no one from GoFundMe, no representative from GoFundMe reached out to the organizers of the truckers convoy. And basically they just got a notification on one of their phones saying that the money has been seized, long story short.
So they took
and that's where we are.
$10 million out of the, and the protest is legal, correct? I mean, like, this wasn't an illegal protest. Or was it?
Yeah, nope. It's legal. It's totally legal. And if you're on the ground here in Ottawa, you know how peaceful it's been all week. There's no violence at all. The whole thing is just hard to wrap your head around how they're demonizing and doing all these insane things. Like you mentioned earlier, state of emergency now declared. If you're on the ground here, you just shake your head and you're thinking, what is going on? They must be so out of touch.
But what were the grounds that they gave in order to basically steal the $10 million? And how long are they supposed to keep that? Meaning, are they going to give it back to the people who gave it? I mean, this is very peculiar behavior, I put it that way, for them to basically steal the money like this.
Well, they deemed that the protest was unlawful, and then there was acts of violence happening at the protest. So the organizers under the impression that they're simply not going to see that money. You know, they've accepted it, and quite frankly, they're not even worried about it. To be honest, they've set up an alternative funding method, which is called Give, Send, Go, and yeah, they really are not worried at all. They think they've already raised, I believe, over $2 million in just a couple of days on that account alone. I think that the numbers might even be higher yet. I haven't recently checked, so. They're not worried. They keep plugging away, and the truckers are making it clear that this isn't going to stop them.
So where does that money go? Is it frozen? Is it refunded back? I know even at one point GoFundMe said that they were going to donate it to a charity. Like,
how are they doing that?
Yeah, how do they get to make the decision with that?
Very vague. It's very vague. It's just the rules that they have set, so they can. I may be wrong about this, but they can basically distribute the money to charities of their choosing. But there is some sort of a refund policy where people are supposedly going to be getting their money back. It's all kind of up in the air right now, so we're gonna kind of have to wait and see.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and yeah, that's the money aspect. I wanted to hit that to frame it because it's ridiculous that you got crowdfunded for $10 million and just immediately say, nope, you can't have it. You know what it reminds me of? The U.S. saying, Afghanistan, you can't have your money. This is the same thing. GoFundMe, you can't have your money. But if we could shift here now, I know that you alluded to the public perception with the state of emergency. And I mean, you've seen it on the ground there. What is the difference? Because I was listening to, I listen to NPR every morning just to hear their take on things. NPR says, yeah, well, is it NPR painted it as the so-called freedom convoy of right-wing anti-vaxxers are violently uprising, and they're flying Nazi flags, and they're throwing fireworks at government officials and police officers. And all of this is why the state of emergency had to be declared, as Ottawa holds their breath before it might burn down.
It's well, if you know Canadians are stereotypically very peaceful, loving people, and this protest has amplified that. I've been on the ground here since last Thursday, and I've seen nothing but peace and love, quite frankly, on the ground. There's children everywhere. It's a family environment. There's bouncy castles set up for kids to play on. There's food stations literally set up all across the city where they are handing out free food to anybody. And that doesn't matter whether you're a protester, a supporter, a trucker, or you're someone in need, a homeless person in the city of Ottawa. You can go and get fed. They're shoveling the streets. It's just such an open, caring, it's a community, really. And the fact that they're demonizing the protests is insane. You may be wondering, you may be wondering, okay, are they blocking traffic? Is the city gridlocked? This and that. Yes, they're in the downtown core, right in front of Parliament Hill. Yeah, it's tough to get around, but the truckers have really cleared up space so that cars can get by, local traffic can get by, and they're really doing everything they can to make their demonstration peaceful, but they want their message heard at the same time. And I can't reiterate enough how peaceful it has been, and it really just goes to show how out of touch the media party is here in Canada, and the politicians and the elite class, because they're clearly out of touch. They haven't been on the ground here talking to people. Obviously, they haven't had any interactions, and it's all just hearsay.
Has there been any violence at all, or has there been any, let's say, conflict, even if it's small and minor, that's been blown out of proportions? And how does the public itself, and especially in Ottawa itself, has been viewing the protesters?
Yeah. So I don't believe so. I don't believe there's been any arrest related to the protest itself. I know that I believe last night there was 7 arrests, because now they are, and I may be wrong about that, but I know there are now, so since the state of emergency has been declared, they're basically going to start arresting or ticketing. Again, we don't really know because it's unprecedented. Anybody bringing in supplies to the truckers. So whether that's gas, perhaps food, they are starting to arrest people. So I think you had another part to that question. Can you remind me?
Yeah, sure. One was, were they arresting people, and what was the point of view of the people in Ottawa itself on the protest? Meaning the majority point of view regarding the protest.
So from the locals in Ottawa?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
You mean? Yeah, so from the locals, we've spoken to many people on the ground that live just blocks away from the protest, and they're in full support of it. And yeah, they admit the honking's loud. It can be a little tough to sleep and stuff, but they're in full support about these truckers standing for the rights of Canadians and trying their best to get these mandates dropped. But on the other hand, yes, there's lots of Ottawa citizens who are not happy about it, I would say. We've talked to some people on the streets, and one of my colleagues, Alexa Lavoie, has a video where she goes around talking to just everyday citizens around the area of Ottawa, And it's a little bit of a 50-50 draw with people being in support of it and some people just hating it. So it's tough to grab an actual perception to say whether or not the locals are, the majority is in favor or not. Ottawa is the capital of Canada, so it is a lot of government workers, a lot of that sort of class. So it's tough to say, but that's basically where it stands now.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen from our media here that Ottawans just in general are so fed up with this convoy, and at the same time they're painting them as like legitimate freedom fighters, that they're ready to tear down Ottawa to get what they want. It's funny, I do believe I saw a comment in our chat section earlier that said, LOL, these people are violent protesters. They're shoveling snow and cleaning up trash. Like that's what a Canadian protest looks like.
Yeah, Canadian protest.
Yeah. I'm curious to know from your perspective, we had put out a little bit of a prediction earlier this show. Do you think that the protest can win out? To a degree, can it win out? Because, I mean, so far it's still been entirely, and correct me if I'm wrong, pushback from the government. Right now they're putting up more barricades. They're trying to get, what are the titles of the cars, of the trucks, to try to get them towed or try to prosecute some people. So, and especially with the freezing of those funds that we were talking about earlier, yes, they made $2 million in a couple days, but is it enough to keep the protest going in full swing? Are Ottawans just gonna kind of riot and revolt against it because their city needs to go back to normal? Can the government afford to wait this out, or are the truckers that determined?
My best guess, from what I'm gathering on the ground, from talking to truckers and everything, every single trucker that I've spoken to says that they're not going anywhere. You know, they have like a real system down here to keep the truckers afloat, and even last night, with the state of emergency being declared, we were seeing videos of police seizing fuel. So trying to stop basically seizing the fuel would mean you're trying to stop the trucks from running, right? And it's so cold outside that you'd freeze. You wouldn't be able to last. So from what I gathered last night from talking to truckers, they're really nonchalant about the whole state of emergency, about the fuel being seized. They're really not worried at all. They seem to think that they're going to have a way around this no matter what, and that they're in it for the long haul until these mandates are dropped. It's hard for your American audience to really understand what Canadians have been going through over the past almost 2 years now. It's been really tough. It's been really tough to live here, quite frankly. You know, you need papers right now to go to and by papers I mean you need a vaccine passport with 2 doses of the COVID-19 vaccine you need it to enter a gym. So if you want to go work out, you need it. You got to show papers. If you want to go eat at a restaurant, you need it. And right now we're in Ontario, and the neighboring province of Quebec, you can't even enter a big box store like Walmart, Costco, a hardware store without showing that you're fully vaccinated, and fully meaning 2 doses. So Canadians have just had a really, really tough go, and I think that a lot of Canadians they've finally had some hope restored with these truckers, that maybe these are going to be the guys that will bring Canada back to what it once was, and that's the message I'm getting on the ground here, is that these truckers are in it for the long haul and they want to do it for all Canadians.
Considering that the majority of Canada backs the vaccine requirements, or for that matter, backs the policy of the government on this kind of either vaccination or COVID policy, do you think that they're going to be able to get some kind of concessions out of the government in this case? Or do you think the government is going to get more hardline in order to get these guys out, in order to kind of disperse the crowd in Ottawa? What are your thoughts on that one?
Well, you know what? We are starting to see some very positive things happening. And who knows? That could be a result of the trucker. It could just be a result of just changing of minds, new data coming out. I'm not sure, but we're seeing little things happening all over the country. So in Saskatchewan, which is another province in Canada, they've decided to basically fully drop the mandates, right?
Really?
Wow.
So meaning, which is...
They don't want to be next.
Which is... it's quite crazy to think that, because we really thought that this wasn't going anywhere anytime soon on provincial and federal level. So we see that happening. So a lot of Canadians are hoping that that's going to cause sort of a domino effect for other provinces to follow suit. And now the whole theme with COVID is they've, in Canada at least, is they've always kind of given whispers as to what's to come, right? Like they'll whisper, like they start like almost like they're warming up the people, like, oh, new cases are rising, the Omicron, whatever it may be, you know, a lockdown may be needed. And when you start to hear that, it's almost like you know that a lockdown is coming. We had like 4 lockdowns here in Canada over the past 2 years. So we kind of got used to the course that they run. And point being is that the chief medical officer in Ontario, Kieran Moore, has now stated, so these whispers I'm talking about, that they are going to be reassessing the value of the vaccine passport. So we are seeing little things like that happening all across the country, which are giving Canadians hope. And we'll just have to keep our fingers crossed moving forward.
Mm-hmm. You know, I'm curious, do you think that Ottawans specifically, because this is their city, and you, as you're saying, it's pretty much like a 50-50 in support and pretty against. Do you think that it will cause enough unrest? Because the government's been a little bit uneasy to just act in general with this convoy. Do you think it will cause enough unrest to create some sort of infighting faction group of pro-vaccines that are trying to disrupt it and say, like, hey, get out of our province, I believe, if I can say that?
Yeah, I'm not sure, to be honest. I believe over 90% of the population in Canada in general is vaccinated, so yeah, it's tough to say, really. I'm not sure. Again, it's hard to actually assess. I don't even know if it's a 50-50, so it's a 50-50 draw with that video that we shot, but it's so hard to actually gather a consensus, right? And see what the actual numbers are. But it's just tough to tell.
Sure, yeah. Something I'm curious to know about from the ground, because again, we've heard one story from reporting over here, and it seems to be very wildly different than the actual reality. So one part that's been touted again and again is that, oh, it started as a vaccine mandate against truckers, that's what they're fighting against, and has now turned into let's overthrow Trudeau. So what are the real requests coming from this protest? And if it was about, it doesn't matter what it's about, let's say Trudeau could come out and say, okay, let's roll back the trucker vaccine mandate. Would that be able to solve it?
So right now, I believe their stance is that they want all mandates dropped. This originally started as a protest against the cross-border vaccine mandate for truckers, meaning that you needed to be vaccinated to cross the border as a truck driver without having to quarantine for 14 days. So for truckers, it just doesn't make sense, right? So initially, that's what they were standing for. But it quickly turned into a demonstration against all the mandates. So I believe at this point that even if they were to drop the trucker specific mandate, I think they're staying regardless until all mandates are dropped in Canada.
Wow. One of the things that I guess chilled me a little bit, Austin and I were talking about it this morning, and it has to be the way that they're talking about the protesters. And it almost sounds like they're conflating Canadian protesters with basically what happened here on January 6th. And this could be just the way I'm listening to it or hearing it. And it could even just be my own American context, in regards to the events that took place. But the language that they're using, basically saying violent, white supremacists, Nazis, etc. It sounds like a huge amount, as if they want to basically associate these guys with Donald Trump. And they're associating, meaning even this line right here, it says Ottawa police relocated some protesters and put up fresh barricades on Sunday, saying they are, quote, collecting financial, digital, vehicle registration and other evidence to be used in criminal prosecution. Okay, what criminal prosecution? Like, this is not a situation where these guys basically raided the Capitol. What it sounds like is that they're just in the way and that they're walking around with signs. I mean, I was reading the New York Times on it. They said it came across as a festive environment even. Like you said, they were shoveling snow. And so I get,
absolutely.
Yeah, so I get they're in the way. I get that the overwhelming majority of Canada is already vaccinated. So many people may be disagreeing with the fact that they're there. But clearly, there's a contingent of Canada that backs these guys or supports these guys. And even if you're talking about like 10% of Canada, how many people is that? That's still a huge number of people, especially if those people are located in one very specific area. So are you concerned that they're going to try to put political pressure for prosecution. Like here, for January 6th, they were getting people, they were locking up grandmas in California that just so happened ended up in the Capitol on that day. Do you think they're trying to do something similar to the people in Canada for this particular protest, even though what happened in January 6th are dramatically different than what's happening there in Ottawa?
Yeah, I think they are trying to paint that type of narrative, and they're deeming the protests unsafe, violent, and that they're stealing food from the homeless. I don't even know where they come up with this stuff. Like I said, on the ground, it's the complete opposite. It's just people walking around with signs. It's like Canada Day, right? It's just like a Canada Day festival. That's the best way to describe it. It's literally just a festival. Everyone walking around, high-fiving each other, kids playing together. It couldn't be farther from the truth. And
are they worried about being prosecuted? Like, are they worried about the cops taking their information, or the cops finding ways to kind of pinch them later on when they go back home? Is that something that's coming up?
People do think that there is, people have talked about some sort of January 6th type method, but the majority of people here that I've talked to, they're so fed up with what's going on in Canada that they could care less about that. They're just going to stand and fight. It's important for them to be out there standing with their fellow Canadians and trying to get their country back.
If I can pose a little bit of a conspiratorial perspective for you. Trudeau conveniently got COVID right as they arrived into Ottawa. He said, okay, I need 2 weeks. I need to quarantine. I need to get out. And I guess I just can't go into the city right now, guys. I got to do my due diligence and stay home. So, first question, do we think that, okay, this was a great timing, ironic circumstance, or that he could have just, taken the 2 weeks off to get out of the public sphere? And then the general, more pressing question, how do we see Trudeau dealing with this because it sounds like the truckers are there to stay for a long time, come in another week or so, when he's forced to contend with it? How do we see him responding to that?
It is kind of a funny coincidence that he coincidentally got COVID as soon as the truckers came to town. Like literally as soon as they came, he has COVID. And it's funny because he said he had to enter isolation, right? And let's note that he has 3 doses, gets COVID, has to enter isolation, and then in the middle of the weekend says that he's going to his cottage with his family. So he's breaking the rules, right, that he set, leaving isolation, going with his family to the cottage. So that's that. It is a funny coincidence, but do I see him coming and talking to the people, you mean? Like coming out and trying to work with them? No, I do not see that. At this point, you kind of wouldn't expect anything less from Mr. Trudeau. It seems like he does not want to work with these people. He calls the people out here a fringe minority, and it's so clear that it's not that. When you see the numbers, you see the videos of how many people are out here. It's people from all walks of life out here, all walks of life.
Have any of the political parties backed these guys up? Like, meaning, is there any political clout that have backed up the protesters? Like, for example, in the U.S., you would have like the right wing. You might have like a DeSantis or somebody in the Republican Party that basically will back people who are basically pushing back against either the vaccinations or the protocols that the governments have been taking. Yeah. What about in Canada?
So like I said, there's been a lot of funny stuff that's been happening, and as this whole truckers convoy has been going on, the leader of the Conservative Party, Erin O'Toole, was voted out as leader, which is funny timing. And now, I believe 2 days ago, someone by the name of Pierre Poilievre has announced that he will be running for the leader of the Conservative Party, ultimately seeking to be the Prime Minister. And we did a video, actually, as soon as Erin O'Toole got voted out, asking people who would they like to see to replace him. And the number one answer, pretty much from every single person we interviewed on the street, was Pierre Poilievre. So now, and then about a day or two after that, Pierre announces that he's running for the leader of the Conservative Party. So things are happening right now down here. Canadians are starting to get a bit of hope. They do believe that Mr. Poilievre could be the person that gets them out of this mess. That's basically what he's running on, is that he's trying to get Canadians' freedoms back. So that's something to be hopeful for. There's another leader here of the People's Party of Canada, Maxime Bernier, who a lot of Canadians also have hope for, but his party is on a much smaller scale than the Conservative Party. So I would say Pierre Poilievre is kind of the hope right now for many Canadians.
Okay, yeah. Lincoln, I'm curious, have you heard of or seen a sizable or even just minimal American presence over there, which leads us into the next part of this conversation? I mean, as nice and genuine as Canadians are, the U.S. we're very hostile around our vaccines. If we are or not, it's a very, very, very divisive issue. I could see a convoy like this happening and growing a lot of popularity here. And it probably wouldn't be as nice of leaving open one lane or so on the street. It would shut down D.C. And there's talks of that happening, possibly from L.A. to D.C. or even from Ottawa to D.C. So I'm curious, are any of those truckers that you've talked to, either is there an American presence or do they have any plans to then take it down to the States?
As of right now, I would say honestly no, because they're just so focused on getting Canada back to what it once was. Like I said, the mandates here have just been almost unbearable to deal with if you aren't vaccinated. It's important to note too that a lot of the people here standing with the people are actually double vaccinated, and they can single vaccinated, double, some triple, and they can see they simply can see what's happening is not right. So as of right now, I don't know. I can't really comment on whether or not they would take the convoy to the States. I just know the primary focus right now is restoring Canadians' freedoms and having these mandates dropped.
What do you think this is going to ultimately turn out as? I mean, if they're calling a state of emergency, do you think the military is going to get involved? I know Trudeau has basically said he's not going to do that, but do you think that's going to change if this convoy goes on for the next several weeks? And for that matter, how do you think it ultimately resolves? Does it resolve with, I don't believe Trudeau is going to step down. And I guess the question is, do you think that he's going to give in at all in order to kind of acquiesce to some of the demands in order to get these guys to get rid of him?
Yeah, it's so hard to answer that question because, let's say, we asked the organizers of the convoy, the leaders, so people who've started this movement, if they had any concerns about the military being called in. They said no, just because of the type of environment here, the family environment. It would just be chaos if they were to do that. There's kids everywhere. So they just don't think that would be a good look for the military. Now, there's been tow truck companies, right, around Ottawa that have been denying service calls from the government to have these tow trucks removed. So we know that's one method or one tactic that they've been considering. But even if, let's say that tow truck drivers came to the scene and they attempted to tow these trucks away with no interference at all from truckers, from protesters, supporters, that would take days, if not weeks, to move all these trucks out. There's just so many trucks. And then again, that's if there was nobody interfering with the towing of the trucks. So it's really tough to say what kind of tactics the government's going to be using. Like I said, they are trying to seize the fuel from the sources. There's various kind of like base setups where they're bringing in fuel trucks and stuff and using jerry cans, et cetera, to deliver fuel to the truckers. So we know that is one method, basically trying to cut off the power to their trucks. And this is crazy when you think about it, because I've talked to a trucker who has a 6-month-old baby with them. A lot of the truckers have brought in their family on the road and kids, and they would freeze. They would literally freeze. It's freezing here in Canada. So that we know that's one tactic that they are using. It's unprecedented, so it's really hard to say.
I'm sure. Yeah, Lincoln, I have one last question for you before we let you go. There's talks of the convoy coming to the U.S., maybe not from Canada, maybe even originating. They're talking about going from West Coast to East Coast, L.A. to D.C. The only problem is when they've tried to organize it, they started a Meta or Facebook group that amassed 100,000 followers, 100,000 members in a single day. And to which Facebook was like, nope, gonna shut that down immediately. They closed out the group, disbanded it. Supposedly, this convoy is still going to happen sometime in March in the States, but seems like it's been hard to try to organize somewhere for everyone to get on the same page. So was Canada able to do that ahead of time before Facebook was able to shut them down? Was it a Facebook group? Do you know how they organized in order to all have this collective agreement? And yeah, I guess that it just stands like that, because if we can't organize, frankly, we're not going to have a convoy. But I think if we even have a semblance of a convoy, we're going to have a massive convoy.
Yeah, it takes a lot of organizing for sure to get something like this done. I believe there. I'm not exactly sure if there was Facebook groups that started, but we have something called Telegram, which I'm sure you guys have too, which a lot of the truckers were on to kind of organize. So basically what they did is they just organized different convoys coming from different parts of Canada, and they all just met up here in the capital. So I don't think there was any methods to shut them down or anything. I don't think the government realized what was actually going to happen. You know, it was kind of the first of its kind on this type of scale. So I don't know if they really perceived it as such a threat until it was actually in their faces in the capital here. And I think it kind of took them by surprise. And I think they maybe thought that it was just going to be a couple of days of protesting. Truckers are going to get tired. They're going to want to go home. But it's been, since the convoys started leaving, it's now been basically over 2 weeks. And I don't think the government saw this coming. So I think now why you're seeing the groups in the States, et cetera, they're having their pages shut down is because they see what's happening here. They see how much momentum it's drawn. It's brought Canada onto the world stage. The world is watching. And I think that a lot of other countries, states, whatever the case may be, they're seeing this as something that they want to probably avoid at all costs. So that's what I would say about that.
Lincoln, thank you for being with us today. Lincoln J. is a Canadian video journalist for independent outlet Rebel News. He joined Rebel News as a videographer in August 2020 while specializing in video editing and camera work. Lincoln has also expanded into reporting and presenting his own stories. You can follow him on Twitter at LincolnMJ. We're going to close it here for now. We're coming back, taking your calls. The number's 202-521-1320. Got about 13 minutes to take them back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Pelly. Be back in a moment.
Fault Lines.
Feeling kind of blue, but maybe also kind of red, and kind of purple, and kind of alone? You've got a friend on Radio Sputnik. Tune into Political Misfits from 12 to 2 Eastern Time, Monday through Friday, for news, politics, and culture without the two-party bias. Catch us daily on 105.5 in Washington, D.C., or 102.9 or 104.7 in Kansas City. Or find us on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, Spotify, or wherever you get your news.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined by my co-host, Austin Pelly, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. And this is The Wrap. We have calls. You can call us, 202-521-1320. And the line is full at this point. So let's go to the first one, Seth from Detroit. Seth, what's going on, my man? Motor City. How's it going?
I'm doing pretty good. Hope you guys are having a great one.
We are, yes. What's on your mind?
Well, you know, we're rapidly approaching a world of autonomous self-driving vehicles. Going on, and Canada won't be possible in probably 5 years or so. That's my guess. With that in mind, why do you think there hasn't been a massive surge in Uber, Lyft, Shift, truckers in America? I'm shocked, but why do you think there hasn't been, just kind of like a wave of blue collar workers kind of just hitting the roads and shutting it down?
Well, because
considering the last.
Well, I would say, right now, it's incredibly expensive to own a car, let alone operate one in the States. I mean, the inflation rates are insane with the car industry, as well as gases, which isn't going down anytime soon. Also, within our last, I'd say, 2 years or so, those type of gig workers have gotten a horrible rep, not for them, but for the company's sake. So it's been, I mean, Uber, we reported it like a few months ago. Uber has like a 50% employee rate now, like employee drop, as opposed to just pre-pandemic levels, because they're not looking out for their employees. It's entirely gig work, and you don't make a lot of money.
Right.
So that's how I see it. I mean, Jamarl, you have a take on that?
I mean, I don't know why we haven't. Maybe I guess it depends on how you look at it, right? It's January 6th. Does that count? Or does BLM count? I mean, I know it's not set in the context of like truckers who are going into the thing, or like Yellow Vest movement, where there was this kind of specific increase in costs to standard of living in regards to the gas tax, in which case people came out specifically for it. But does it have to be specific for it, for that same energy to kind of be present of the population itself pushing back against what it considers to be this kind of unfair conditions? I mean, if everything else was perfectly fine, would you still get those truckers doing it with the vaccination thing? Meaning everything else is fine with that one issue being there. I don't necessarily know if you're going to get that same pull in the same way that you have it currently. Meaning, I guess my point is, I think there are often other issues that pile on to get people to basically engage. And sometimes those issues can show themselves in a vaccination. Sometimes they can show it in an increase in fuel tax. Sometimes they can show it in cops killing somebody in which people go out, or January 6th. I guess I'm wondering, is the blue collar thing, does it have to be specific to blue collar, or can it be other items that has that same energy associated with it? Does it make sense?
Seth, do you have a take on it?
Yeah, no, that does make sense. My take on it, you're right. Right, blue collar, white collar, whatever, right? One team. But my take on it is something essential has been eroded in the American people over the last 20 years or so.
Agreed.
My take on it. What that essential thing is, I hesitate to name it, but it's certainly somewhere around people just really, like, Americans really are just eating shit, and they're just like,
hey, cut that. Yeah, we're on radio, my man.
Sorry, we just can't have it on public radio.
Yeah.
Poop.
Okay.
Thank you.
It's quite surprising. Like, I don't know. It just seems that, I don't know. Americans have lost some kind of a grit. That's my.
Yeah. Seth, I hear you, man. That's Seth calling from Detroit. Thank you for contributing. Now let's go over to Daniel. Daniel from San Antonio. You're on the line, Daniel. What's on your mind?
Yeah, I'm a trucker too, and I can give a reason as to why you're not going to see as big as a convoy like you saw in Canada, simply because you hinted to it in the report that when this group on Facebook showed up, it was taken down the next day. So we're not in like Iran to where that's going to be allowed to happen. I wanted to bring the conversation back to Joe Rogan.
Okay.
And for everyone who wants to defend Joe Rogan out there, there's two simple things you can do. One is share the interview of him with Daryl Davis, the black man who helps white people see the light and leave the KKK. And two, go Google Twitter, Joe Rogan, men kissing. And it'll bring up the tweet from 2012 where he points out that he's happy to see two men comfortable to be kissing in public. Take a screenshot of that and post it to the naysayer of Joe Rogan and just let the chips fall where they may.
Well, here's the thing, though. You know, the people who hate Rogan are going to hate Rogan. The people who love him are going to love him. And so I don't think Rogan loses anybody from watching the video, because I don't know anybody who thinks Rogan is racist. I mean, it's like, yeah, he got caught saying it. It's inappropriate. Entirely true. Is that the same thing as the individual being racist? And is this just them piling on in order to kind of deplatform Rogan? And I suspect it's them piling on to deplatform Rogan.
Well, it's also a question of, are they calling Joe Rogan a bigot, or are they calling him a racist? Because I could understand if they're calling him a bigot and you point to him saying, like, no, I'm pro same-sex marriage and all that. And the two men kissing, as you're saying, that might discredit him as a bigot. But if they're saying specifically on the race issue, here's our example. And I say that just from arguing the other perspective, I don't know if that really helps solve it. Daniel, last thoughts.
I don't really have any. I just lost it.
No problem. Fine. Thank you. Thank you for the call. Always good to hear from you. Now let's go to Luis calling in from Virginia. Luis, you're on the air. What's on your mind?
Yes. Good morning, folks. Let's concentrate on the truckers and not get off on the television and the racism and all that stuff. That could be a side diversion. This is a unique opportunity, and I would like to add to what Seth said. I do agree that something has been lost, and what has been lost is what truckers used to be the epitome of. They used to be the American hero. They were mobile, they were independent, they weren't controlled by big business, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And maybe you young men don't realize that completely, but certainly people from a slightly older generation would jump at the chance to support honest workers like truckers, because we used to idolize them, just the way we used to idolize the police. We used to idolize honest workers, and we don't anymore. And the truckers in the U.S. could bring that back if they could get themselves organized.
I'm curious, Luis, from your standpoint, what do you think we've lost, if that makes sense? I mean, because I agree with both of you on this. I think
there's valuing hard work is what you're saying, right?
Yeah, but I don't think I don't think we undervalue hard work. I mean, productivity in this country is just through the roof in comparison to other countries. I mean, but there does seem to be something, I don't know, different. It's almost as if, I don't know if it's a lack of capability that used to be there before, a lack of competence. But something is different. I mean, even if you look at our old political leaders, and I often question, is this me looking back fondly on the past, or is this one of those things where it was always this way, but I'm looking back fondly on it? I don't think that's the case anymore. I mean, if I look back at, for example, Kennedy during the missile crisis, the Cuban Missile Crisis, yes, he got us involved in it. But if we had the same political leaders that we have today, would we have been able to extricate ourselves from that without there being a larger conflict? And I don't think so. It just feels like there's been a degrade or degradation in regards to the skill and competence of the various people who are basically in charge these days. I could be wrong, but it just seems that way.
Luis, would like to reply?
Oh, she's gone. She dropped.
Okay. Well, I do also have to say, I've been saying, if they come to D.C., I'll be right there in the streets.
You would. Right.
Man on the streets. I'll be taking calls and getting the ground reporting in. I think it'd also be curious to see the difference in American trucking
versus a Canadian protest.
Versus, how the protests look. I mean, I don't see the American truckers probably shoveling snow and picking up trash.
Neither do I.
But I also don't think it would be totally violent by any means. So we'll see. We do have another caller. We're taking more. But Tarif's back on. Tarif, what's on your mind, man?
Thanks for taking my call again, gentlemen. I have to add on to what I was saying before. First, I'd like to say, Truckers for Freedom USA, Truckers for Freedom Global is on Telegram, just in case anybody want to follow them. Okay, Stella Morris, Joe Rogan, give her a 4-hour platform where she can talk about WikiLeaks and things in the nation. Stella Morris with Julian Assange lawyers, where they can focus straight on freedom of speech and frame Julian Assange. Second thing, with the movement, I forgot to say, they had children that died when they dropped that bomb in 1984 inside that the chimney in Philadelphia community, killing women and children, innocent people. Third comment was the name of the group is for the MKUltra that did documents, that have the documents on it, is Truth Stream Media. They're from out of Texas. They have programs where they discuss people, experiment on people's brains, minds, and breaking them down and trying to create these people that can go off when you give them a certain type of word. I forgot, the Trojan Hulk type of person,
Trigger word.
Yeah.
It's like red circle, and then the person, jumps off a building or something like that.
Yeah, I forgot. The maturing candidate, that's what they was working on. And like at these particular places, I've been trying to get in contact with TruthStream Media. It's kind of hard to get in contact with them. But yeah, that's what I want to say. And let's hope and pray for Julian Assange and for freedom in this country. And but do it peacefully, everybody. Be nonviolent. Thank you. That's all I want to say.
Thank you, Tarif. Appreciate that. And you can hear the music. That means we've come to another end. I want to thank all of you guys for joining us. I want to thank Austin Pelly, co-host. I want to thank our producer, my engineer, and I want to thank, of course, you. You guys joined us and continuing to join us, and we thank you for the calls. We will see you guys tomorrow. You guys have a great, phenomenal, awesome, exceptional day. Fault Lines, Thomas and Pelly, signing off.